that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
As always, we appreciate you starting your day with us. Let's get into this morning's first conversation.
Is the country's healthcare system more at risk more than ever?
Why it has remained unaddressed for so long.
Political parties get lots of cash, big cash from financiers, and then when they get that now, you can't account for it.
But it's really the specialist nurses who we are in a greater shortfall for.
We can tap into the resources and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
The best birthday gifts are at thebesttoys.com. Shop for the best brands you love at the best prices, like VTech, Leapfrog, Fisher-Price, Play-Doh, Hot Wheels, Barbie, Cocomelon, LOL, Baby Alive, Crayola. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McBean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 32DBEST to order. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
WESN.
Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome to AM Prime on WESN. I'm Naomi Machnish.
And I am Jada McLeod.
So this morning we're coming off of the weekend where we had some very interesting things happen. So we had the swearing in of cabinet, of the new cabinet, which we will be discussing this morning. That was I don't know if you all got a chance to look at it, but the entire layout, the entire, the new ministries, the updated ones, the ones that are no longer there.
There have been some changes, some very significant changes, and things that we want to discuss, whether those are good things, bad things, things that we just yet to see what happens with it. So,
yeah, so, well, as we start following the official swearing in of Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Vissasa's cabinet, this was on Saturday, May 3rd, there were 34 appointments, including a mix of veteran politicians, young newcomers, and some surprising combinations. The cabinet has triggered mixed reactions. So some are calling it visionary, others a patchwork of political payback and overloaded ministries. And we see this from Dr. Rudal Monilal in energy to Wayne Sturge in defense, and new ministries focused on AI. This lineup it demands unpacking. So this morning joining us on the program is Mr. David Abdullah, the leader of Movement for Social Justice. Good morning, Mr. Abdullah.
Good morning to you, Jada, and to Naomi. I'm good to be on your program this morning.
Yes. Thank you. So,
Mr. Abdullah, how are you doing today? Just something I always like to ask. What's your morning routine? How's the day going so far?
Well, because you have me on the program so early, some of my morning routine didn't go quite as it would usually go. I have to get back into doing my early morning walking. I've given up, not given it up. I've been able to do that for a couple of weeks, given all of the things that have been happening, but I hope to return to that tomorrow morning. But I normally get up well before 6 anyways.
Yeah. I love that little sort of foreshadowing.
An early morning walk is usually, I think, is one of the best ways to start your morning. I wish I can do that, but it would have to be really, really early.
Yes.
So,
for sure.
As we get into it, can we just get your thoughts? What was your initial impression with the cabinet that was revealed on Saturday?
Okay, well, before we go to the cabinet, I wanted to make a comment because I was with you all on Monday night, a week ago. It seems like it was ages, much more than a week ago. It was last Monday night. And as we were doing some analysis of the election results as they were coming in, and the suggestion was that the voter turnout would have been relatively high. as it turned out, the voter turnout, according to the EDC figures, is the lowest in the last, well, since 1971, in that there was a total voter turnout of less than 54%, which was much lower than 2020 and significantly lower than 2015. And of course, in 2021, in 1971, there was a no-vote campaign, and so only about 30% of the electorate actually turned out to vote, because there was a no-vote campaign. But since then, we have had voter turnouts in the range of 60 to 65%. So I think we need to look at that, and the fallout in the numbers of people voting was particularly significant in the constituencies that are traditionally held by the PNM.
Yes.
So that for example, in Port-of-Spain South, there was a 36% voter turnout. In Laventille, East Morva, 38%, Laventille West, 35.2%, and so on. And that is an indication of something. Even in Diego Martin, the Diego Martin seats, Diego Martin West, 41.2%, Diego Martin Northeast, 42.2%, Diego Martin Central, 44.4%. Those are all very, very low turnouts. And so there's clearly a lot. Well, the PNM lost about 100,000 votes between 2020 and now, and they had declined in 2020 from what they got in 2015. So this is of significance, first of all, that there's such a withdrawal of interest and support, particularly for the PNM in its hardcore constituency. So I think that's something that we need to comment on, and that may be a reflection of people being dissatisfied with the PNM generally in the last 5 or 10 years, but it may also be symptomatic because the turnouts in those constituencies that I mentioned tend to be lower than the national average. So it may also be an indication that people in those urban communities are really not interested or motivated by elections. So I thought I'd make that point before we get into the issue of the cabinet, because that says something about where the country is at.
Yes, I agree. I think I've said this before. The voter turnout that we saw in this general election, it would seem that the PNM supporters are the ones that did not come out and vote, and the UNC supporters were there. They said, let's make this happen.
Yeah. So although the total number of voters for the UNC did not increase that significantly in this election over 2020, they did get an increase, but not. In other words, that 100,000 who did not vote for the PNM did not all shift to the UNC and its coalition partners. Yes. So there was a significant number of people who would have voted last time for the PNM that just did not come out. And that is significant, yes.
So even on this, what lessons do you think the Bisas's UNC government can learn from the PNM's fallout of supporters?
Well, clearly there's an opportunity for them to reach out to those constituencies and to, see if they could build trust and confidence among that group of electors or citizens in the country. So that is an opportunity for them in terms of the policies and programs that they implement going forward. To what extent that will happen, we don't know. That all of these are now hypothetical, and I wouldn't want to go into the realm of hypothesis and so on. But that says something, that there's a large number of people in the country who are not happy with our institutions, whether it be the parliament or the cabinet or the institutions of state, which reflects what I've been saying and the MSA has been saying, that the 1976 Republican Constitution, what we call the First Republic, has collapsed in that the institutions aren't working, and therefore we need significant reform of those institutions if we are to restore some level of trust and confidence of the citizens in our in the state, institutions of state.
Yeah. So, well, they have the opportunity to go in and well, I think if they are able to do what they said they're going to do and really turn the country around in the next 5 years, they do have the chance to win back or win over the PNF supporters or the persons who did not vote in this general election. But can we now get your initial impression on the cabinet that was revealed on Saturday?
Yes, so I don't know that there were any huge surprises in that the UNC during the campaign had indicated that in the case of the Ministry of National Security, they were going to split that into two, defense, and Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar had said this several years ago, into defense and what they're calling homeland security. So I don't think that there was a surprise there. And the fact that you had Mr. Alexander, now Minister Alexander, contesting and winning his seat, there was a clear indication that he would have gotten one of those ministries. Yes. Minister Sturge, being a criminal defense lawyer, obviously would be suited for one of the other ministries. So I don't think there was any big surprise there. With respect to the numbers of persons, given the fact that the UNC won on its own 26 seats, is an indication that you normally try to make sure that as many of those elected members as possible get a ministerial portfolio, or if not ministerial portfolio, then at a rank of cabinet, that they're part of the executive in some form or fashion, and that is what has happened. The appointment of senators, there were some people that were unexpected. For example, Professor Prasad, who's very highly respected and well known in the field of tertiary education. So that was not forecast beforehand, but I don't think that anybody would have any, difficulty. People feel quite comfortable with that appointment. And Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar reverted to some of the ministerial arrangements that she had in the People's Partnership. So there was a Ministry of Tertiary Education in the partnership. When Dr. Rowley came in, that went out, and everything was included under the rubric of the Ministry of Education. But it may make sense to have a separate Ministry of Tertiary Education, because the Ministry of Education is a very large portfolio, dealing with all your primary, secondary schools, your early childhood education centers, and tertiary education is something quite different. And so splitting it makes sense. Or you could have had one ministry and then had more than one minister within that ministry, each responsible for different areas. She has chosen to go the way of splitting the ministries. So I don't think that some of those things are, much of a surprise. A Ministry of Legal Affairs existed under the partnership in 2010, 2015, so she's brought back that arrangement this time around. But there's also a Ministry of Justice, which also existed in 2010, 2015. So she's gone back to that, some of those same ministerial arrangements that she felt worked for her government previously. Now, let me just say that in terms of the appointments of Ernesto Kieser and Clyde Elder, Ernesto being appointed as minister in the Ministry of Energy, I think that is very important, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Similarly, Clyde Elder, Minister in the Ministry of Public Utilities, I think that is very important for the trade unions, because Ernesto, of course, worked in the oil industry. He was an employee at Petrotrin Trinmar Operations, and therefore and an executive officer of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union for a number of years. So he has a lot of familiarity with the oil industry in particular, but energy industry more generally. Clyde Elder worked at TSTT and was Secretary General of the Communication Workers Union, among other executive positions. So he's also familiar with at least one aspect of the portfolio of public utilities, which is telecommunications. There are other aspects, and ODB2, of course, represents workers in electricity, and the PSA and NUGFW represents workers at WASA, and they were all part of the engagement with the UNC going into the election. So I'm sure that in terms of the issues of concern to the workers and unions in those sectors and or public utilities, that they would be well connected to what is happening at the level of policy in the ministry. So I think those two were important appointments.
Despite the ones that you would have mentioned that make sense, do you think that the government structure now is a progressive one, or does it seem bloated to you?
Well, as I mentioned, because you had so many elected members, and then of course you added a number of people in your Senate, then you would get larger numbers. But some of them are parliamentary secretaries, which are not a high-level position within the executive. They're not cabinet ranked. They're not ranked as ministers, nor are they in the cabinet. So that reduces somewhat, the numbers of persons. It is a larger executive than we have had in the past. And we will then have to see how efficient this is. Excuse me. How efficient an arrangement this is. In other words, one of the problems, and when I was on the Economic Development Advisory Board, one of the issues that we were looking at was the question of government inefficiency, and therefore loss of productivity, as you had decision making in silos. So different ministries having responsibility for aspects of an issue, but not necessarily collaborating. Now, when you have, for example, several ministries, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Homeland Security, you're going to have to make sure that they don't operate in silos, that the sharing of information, of intelligence, of operational matters and so on, that works seamlessly. Otherwise, you're going to run into some problems. So those are the kind of management, administrative arrangements that will have to take place, and we will have to see how this works out to make sure that the silo-type activity of the government, which is a historical problem that has existed over the decades, that isn't reinforced by having several ministries in the same general area of responsibility.
So I wanted to kind of silo in onto the energy ministry. How come is that we're seeing Mr. Munilal taking over that portfolio? I know that Kevin Ramnarine was also shadowing the energy minister, as well as Mr. David Lee. How come we're not seeing him in that portfolio, but we're seeing him as Minister of Housing instead of Energy?
That you'd have to ask Mrs. Prasad as a Prime Minister, because the responsibility of the Prime Minister is to allocate ministries to particular persons, elected or nominated in the Senate. So you have to ask her the rationale for that. I don't know. I mean, yes, you're right. Many people thought that Mr. Ramnarine, Kevin Ramnarine, having appeared on the UNC platform for quite some years, he seemed to have been out of it. He was not in the limelight. He was not part of any of the Monday night forums that UNC was having and so on. But in the campaign period and just before the campaign, he did speak at a number of major UNC meetings, not the opening rally or the closing rally, but a number of the major meetings. I think he spoke in St. Joseph and one or two other places. So that may have suggested that he could have been brought in via the Senate to be Minister of Energy, having held that portfolio previously. And there was media and public speculation that is what was going to happen. You're right that Mr. Lee shadowed that in the Parliament, speaking in the House and so on, challenging Minister Stuart Young, who was Minister of Energy at the time, on energy matters in the House of Representatives. So that would have signaled that maybe he could have been Minister of Energy. He's now Minister of Housing. Dr. Munilal in the partnership was Minister of Housing and Urban Development, I think it was. So that is a shift for him to energy. So we will have to see, how the individuals perform in their respective portfolios, which may not have been a portfolio that had been signaled by way of previous activity in the House or outside.
Exactly. So my entire thinking is that the person who should put in energy, because that's such a key ministry for us in Trinidad and Tobago, that person would have to have an extensive set of experience in energy. Can you speak a little bit to who was chosen?
Well, I mean, the thing is that historically that was generally true, but you had cabinets, for example, Mr. Young, when he was appointed Minister of Energy, was not an energy expert.
That was a point of contention too.
Sorry?
Wasn't that a point of contention as well?
Well, yes, but he had worked in the office of the Prime Minister and was tasked with a number of negotiations by the Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, at the time, to deal with the energy companies. So there was a certain amount of familiarity, but he was not an energy expert. If you go back to the mining government, for example, 2007 to 2010, Mrs. Karen Nunez Teixeira was appointed Minister of Finance. That was a very surprising one, because she's not a person in that field at all. She was, or she is an attorney at law. So that was a surprising one. So that often you get people appointed, particularly in the first term of a government, who are not necessarily, quote unquote, subject experts. But it then depends on their ability to manage the ministry and to make policy. And they will be guided, no doubt, by the public servants who are the ones who have, expert knowledge of that industry. And so we'll have to see what Dr. Munilal does. I'm going to say, let us wait and see. He does have the advantage of having Ernesto Kiza as minister in his ministry, and Ernesto is familiar with quite a bit of the energy industry, not necessarily the entire energy industry in terms of upstream gas operations of the multinationals, but he has familiarity with certainly the oil industry and other areas. For example, I know he's familiar with the operations of some of the petrochemical plants in Point Lisas and so on, having negotiated on behalf of the union for Yara, with Yara, which is a company engaged in ammonia production in Point Lisas. So that no doubt will help Dr. Munilal, but we will have to look at what the policies are. I think the key issue is, what are the policies going to be? Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, the evening when the cabinet was sworn in, said that they're going to be looking at an offer from Guyana with respect to getting natural gas from Guyana. I saw my friend Gregory Maguire making a comment. Gregory is very knowledgeable about the energy sector, economist, and he said that the studies will now have to be done with respect to the pipeline from Guyana to Point Lisas, the cost of that and the feasibility of that, and who is going to do what in terms of, what is Guyana's investment, what is Trinidad and Tobago's investment, and so on. What is the role of ExxonMobil, which is the company that is producing most of the oil and gas out of Guyana? What will their role be? What are the contractual arrangements between the government of Guyana and ExxonMobil? None of those things are known. So when you make a statement saying that we're going to look to Guyana and Suriname, you now have to have those matters drilled down to see what are the contractual arrangements between companies and governments, and what is the feasibility, what is the cost, what is the timeline to deliver gas out of Guyana or Suriname into Trinidad and Tobago, because all of those, there's a lead time for these major energy projects. So we have to wait to see now, having heard or haven't had a signal of a policy direction, we now have to wait and see how does that policy direction translate into real actions going forward. An indication too of Grenada, there's been exploration in Grenada, but there's no proven reserves in Grenada as far as I'm aware. But there's a sense that Grenada does have significant natural gas, because we're all in the same geographical space. But if you don't have actual production, how long will it take for Grenada to get production up and running? Because there's a lead time there, and then how long will it take from that production to get it into Trinidad and Tobago? All of these things require time. and Trinidad and Tobago does not have a lot of time with respect to getting our gas production up, and therefore our revenues for the government up and our foreign exchange up. Some quicker wins might be in the oil industry, if there's more aggressive work being done in the Gulf of Paria, in the acreages held by Petrotrin, what was held by Petrotrin,
Yes.
Trinidad Operations, which is now Heritage. If there is significant investment made to get oil production up, that could be quicker, because the acreages are better known and the infrastructure is more or less in place, although some additional investment would have to be done to improve the infrastructure of pipelines and platforms and so on. So that might be a quicker win, but again, I don't have all of that detail. These are the things now that we'd have to hear Minister Munidal speak about in real terms, and therefore we'll get a sense of his ability to manage this very important portfolio with respect to policy actions going forward.
I want to jump over to Minister Devesh Maharaj. He got the position of Minister of Justice and also Minister in the AG's office. So, how do you think that might affect justice reform or independence? Because, I mean, those two, I think they go hand in hand. In my opinion, they were a good appointment. How do
yes,
you...
I think that, Mr. Maharaj is, respected within the legal fraternity, accomplished attorney at law, so quite competent to be in those positions of responsibility. Now, from the experience of the partnership, because that is what you have to go on to get a sense of what the Ministry of Justice would do, there was Mr. Herbert Volney was the Minister of Justice, if you will recall, and he had the responsibility of trying to move the issue of reform of the justice system, and so things like, which didn't materialize, but he talked about, major new court complexes. There was one supposed to be in Malabar, there was one supposed to be in Carlson Field. He wanted to have these large centralized administrative court arrangements. And now whether that will happen this time around or whether that is going to be a proposal, we just have to wait and see. There was also the issue of the removal of preliminary inquiries, the Administration of Justice Act, which was passed, and then it became very controversial when the Cabinet decided to proclaim Section 34 only and not roll out the thing, and that created a whole furor. Now, preliminary inquiries have in fact been done away with. In the last administration, that was addressed. So the area, though, of the reform of the criminal justice system in particular, the civil justice arrangements work slowly, but they work, but the criminal justice system clearly is broken, and therefore that would be a key ministry to try to ensure that we don't get justice delayed, because as the old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. Now, part of that is trying to have staffing done in the DPP's office, properly staffed office of the DPP, because there's a clear log jam coming out of or going into the DPP's office because of the shortage of staff, and the DP himself has made statements about that. Now, of course, the Minister of Justice doesn't hire staff, yes, but would be able to try and get the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, over which, again, the government does not have any control, but to try and interface with the Chief Justice, who is the chair of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, to have more persons appointed to the DPP's office, and other areas within the judiciary that may need staffing, that the financial resources now, this is where the Minister of Justice has to liaise with the Minister of Finance, to have financial resources allocated in such a way in the budget that those key areas of work to make sure that we have a proper functioning justice system, that those things are addressed in terms of resource allocation. So we will see how that goes. Clearly, Minister Devish Maraj will be of assistance to the Attorney General, John Jeremy, in terms of other matters with respect to law reform, with respect to the legislative agenda, because you will have to have a fairly heavy legislative agenda. One hopes that the commitments made to bring about labor legislation reform now, because you heard the Prime Minister speak about other matters which were concerned to her and her government, but clearly labor legislation reform of the Industrial Relations Act, the repeal of the ancient Workmen's Compensation Act and its replacement, updating the Occupational Safety and Health Act, all of the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act, all of those require significant effort. Well, I shouldn't say effort, political will to get into the Parliament, because a lot of work has already been done by way of consultation over the last, 15 years by successive governments and so on, and successive ministers of labour to have consultations, tripartite consultations or discussions with respect to amending labour legislation. So one hopes that the AG's office, Attorney General, and Minister Devish Maraj will be able to place those amended pieces of legislation, labour legislation, on the Parliament's agenda very, very quickly.
So I wanted to move on to the Ministry of what was, I guess, digital transformation, and now making it public administration and artificial intelligence. I know we didn't really get a breakdown on what exactly some of these new ministries are going to be responsible for doing. But when you first heard about this ministry, what did you think?
Well, if you recall, under the Rowley administration, there was initially the Ministry of Public Administration and Digital Transformation. And then that ministry was split into two, Ministry of Public Administration on one hand, and then Ministry of Digital Transformation on the other hand. So what has happened now is there's been a consolidation again of those two areas with a name change. So instead of digital transformation, we now have artificial intelligence. The issue of artificial intelligence is absolutely essential for Trinidad and Tobago to get involved in at the level of policy and policy implementation. Of course, people are using artificial intelligence. Individuals are using it, students are using it. I'm sure you guys use it as well. I use it sometimes, but I'm not that familiar. Our party chair, Gregory Fernandez, who I know has been on one of your programs before, who's a software person. He has a software company, so he's very much into AI.
Yes,
so companies are using it. We don't know if government ministries are using it. And so digital transformation is one aspect of the use of technology. In other words, digitizing documentation for old records that need to be now made digital. So access to the information on those records can be instantaneous rather than taking 3 years to find a file somewhere that got lost somewhere. So that is one important aspect of that work. And making sure that all government ministries are, you could access their services online and information online and so on. So that is one aspect. But the other aspect now would be about using AI in the actual processes within the government. For example, if you have a meeting and somebody has to take minutes, you could actually do that using AI. You simply record the meeting and use AI, and it will produce a summary. It's not 100% perfect, but it might be 90%, and therefore one person could simply edit that. And that could save a lot of time and so on. So there are ways of using AI to make your work more efficient in terms of, for example, tracking projects that are supposed to be implemented by a ministry. To what extent are those projects on stream? Project managers now will be using AI to assist them in managing their projects. So the use of AI is important, and therefore rolling out an AI policy internally for the government would be necessary, and that would clearly be a responsibility for this ministry. But also, what is the country's approach to AI? And I'll hold back a little bit on that because MSJ may be making some statements about that coming up. But clearly, in terms of education, our students in primary and secondary school and tertiary education, are our students be prepared for not just the utilization of AI, but the development and use of AI to increase their capacity?
I think
and so on.
is an interesting way, because I feel like, especially with my peers, we've already been using it. Do you think it was smart of the government to launch a whole ministry of artificial intelligence when there's no set regulation for it as yet?
Well, the ministry will then have the responsibility of developing a policy that could then be turned into a legislative arrangement. And yes, we are way behind the game. Europe has already put in place legislation, the EU, with respect to the use of AI. One of our own great talents and creatives, Ms. Renee Cummings, speaks extensively about AI all over the world. I think, she's been in South Africa, she was in Asia the other day, and so on. She speaks about AI both in terms of its application, but the ethical questions that arise from AI. And she's been doing that for quite some time. So we do need to have a regulatory framework for the use of AI in the country. That is necessary, because AI could be used in very destructive ways. People put up things on TikTok and so on that are completely false, where you have somebody face, which is their actual face, and you see their lips moving, but the words that are being spoken either are not their words or even are not their voice, and that is dangerous. So you get a lot of fake news, a lot of misinformation, and quite clearly those things are wrong and should be made illegal. Yes, and people who are doing those things should be punished by the law, because it's fraud. It's fraud, not necessarily in the old ways of signing your name on a letter that is not your name to sign, but you're fraudulently signing it, but it's fraud. And the false use of AI in this way is also fraud and is wrong. So we do need a regulatory framework, and hopefully this ministry then, together with the Attorney General's office, would address some of those things.
I think that's why putting an entire ministry just for artificial intelligence, I think was a very good move, because of how fast AI is growing and how broad it is, and the different aspects of it that we need to catch up on in creating policies and creating certain rules and laws. We need to focus on it. And in order to properly focus on it, we need to have someone specific to that, and that we can, work with, and they'll be able to work with other ministries, rather than it just be a certain aspect or a small part of a ministry.
Yes, one aspect, because that Ministry of Public Administration itself is large. So it deals with a number of matters dealing with the management of the public service, making the public service more efficient, and also it has the responsibility, unless it's going to be shifted elsewhere, of the government agency that is responsible for rentals and lease arrangements of government buildings, and so on. So as well as government buildings itself. So it's a very large ministry. And so one hopes that there will be good technical expertise brought into the ministry to make sure that the work of digitizing and making sure the government is up to date with respect to having online availability of services and records and all of that, that work continues, but it's not complete, as well as the new area of AI within the government and for a national policy on AI generally, leading to regulation.
So, as we're on public administration, people always talk about constitutional reforms. That is shifting a little bit to this. We recently had an analyst on to talk, an economist on to talk about how the fact that we're not moving forward as a country because we need constitutional reform. It's not about laziness, it's not about really political will, it's about constitutional reform. Can you add anything to that conversation? I know it's pretty broad.
Well, yes, but it is. But let me say that I've been involved in discussions around constitutional reform for many a year, many a decade, because I was one of the founders, together with Mr. Dennis Pantin, then later Professor Dennis Pantin, and some others, of what started off as a constitutional reform committee and then became the Constitutional Reform Forum, CRF. Yes. And we did a lot of work around constitutional reform beginning around the year 2000, 2001. That's 25 years ago, right? Before you guys were in preschool. So, so the issue of constitutional reform is vitally important for the country. There was an effort by the Rowley government when he set up last year the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform of eminent persons, and they produced a very extensive report, which then essentially got left in a dustbin or is on a shelf somewhere. So, but it is very important. It's not what we would call, quote unquote, a sexy issue, because it does not track the attention of the average citizen. They don't think that it is necessary. But in truth and in fact, many, if not most, of the problems that citizens have in their day-to-day lives track back to or find their roots in a system of governance that is broken. So when people feel that their MPs are not around and not taking care of their problems, one aspect of that problem, if quite apart from an MP being just a bad MP, but it may be because the MP is also a minister. And when you have an MP having to be a minister and having, therefore, ministerial responsibilities, cabinet meetings and so on, meetings of the subcommittees of cabinet, and then add to that having to be in the constituency and in the parliament and on parliamentary subcommittees, it really leaves very little time for effective representation. And so if you have constitutional reform, which specifies that a member, an elected member of parliament in the House of Representatives should not be a government minister, then that person could function properly on representing his or her constituents, not only in terms of problems that the constituents have, but speaking on behalf of the constituents in the parliament, which is what an MP is supposed to be, rather than speaking on behalf of the government in the parliament. So there are many issues when we talk about a prime minister being dictatorial. It is because essentially the constitutional arrangements that we have create a system of prime ministerial dictatorship, in that the person who becomes a candidate for a party, and it goes across the board of whichever party it is, the person who is a candidate has to pass and get the approval of the leader of the party. So when that party wins the election, that candidate has a certain obligation, if you wish, to the leader of the party, who is now the prime minister. And then, as we have in the situation where most of the elected members become part of the executive or the cabinet, yes, you then have a situation where there's no distinction between your executive and your legislature. Now, in theoretical terms, in Western liberal democracies, there are supposed to be three separate branches of the state. One is the executive, namely the cabinet, those who make the decisions. Then you have the legislature that passes laws, but also acts as a check and balance on the executive. And then, of course, you have the judiciary. But in England, for example, we say we have a Westminster system. We don't, because in England you may have 400 members of the Labour Party being elected to the House of Commons, but only 40 of them may be in the executive. So you have 300 who are backbenchers. And you saw that happening, for example, when you had the Conservatives in government and you had the backbenchers revolting against their government. They voted against Boris Johnson, they voted against Theresa May, and brought down those governments, yes? Even though they were in the same party, but the backbenchers representing the views of the constituents said, no, the direction you're going in, Prime Minister and Cabinet, is wrong, and we are going to go against you. So we don't really have a West. And the leader of the party couldn't screen 600 members, candidates who are offering themselves to be candidates in the election. So our system is not really a true Westminster system, and therefore we don't have a distinction between the executive and the legislature. So those are things that we need to discuss in terms of constitutional reform, and there are many other things that we have to address. We had the issue recently of the Privy Council saying that the Judicial and Legal Services Commission was wrong in how it treated Justice Marcia Eyre Caesar. And that raises questions too about the composition of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. I was on a committee appointed by the Law Association. I was the only non-attorney on that committee. And we were looking at issues of judicial appointments and recommended that the Judicial and Legal Services Commission be split into a judicial commission, which would appoint judges and magistrates and so on, and then a legal commission, services commission, that would appoint attorneys in government ministries and DPP's office and so on, to remove the scope of work. And we made other recommendations and so on. So all of that is in the realm of constitution reform. People have spoken about the service commissions and the problems with that. These are issues of constitutional reform. So constitutional reform is absolutely essential. There's also the issue of party and campaign finance legislation, which was before the Parliament for more than 5 years. And interestingly, the Commonwealth Observer team, if you noted that report in the media at their press conference, they said that this is something that is badly needed in Trinidad and Tobago and should be made a priority. But they also said that in their discussions with the two parties that were in the Parliament, both those, which would have been the PNM and the UNC prior to the elections, both those parties said that that was not a priority for them and was not of concern. But when you saw the amount of money being spent in the elections, then you really need to have laws that deal with party and campaign finance, because you see, I'm not saying this happened in this case or the last case and so on, but you could have people involved in criminal activity who have a lot of money to launder and launder it through a political party, and then that party wins the government, and then the government makes the life of these criminals who are involved in white-collar and other types of crime very easy for them to continue their criminal actions. That is possible. Look what has happened in the United States. Not a criminal, but a multi-billionaire, the world's richest man, who now has significant influence and power within the Republican government of Donald Trump, because he financed the party and Trump's campaign to a very large extent. That influence and power of a few people having control over government policy and actions and so on really is undermining of democracy, because your vote and my vote no longer are as important as the money spent by one or two people.
So we have to begin to start wrapping up, but I wanted to ask, what do you make of the doing away with the Ministry of Implementation and Efficiency?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a proposal by then Prime Minister Stuart York. So there was never a ministry like that, okay? So one will have to see exactly how the cabinet functions, how ministers are held to account. One of the problems that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, and the late Mr. Reginald Dumas, who was at one time head of the public service, he was one of our leading members of the diplomatic corps, did a paper which he shared with me many moons ago, when he was head of the public service, or a senior member of the public service. So that is way back in the 1980s, I suppose, or 90s, or late 80s. That's to tell you how long it was. That paper showed that the number of cabinet notes that went to the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago was in the thousands compared to the number of cabinet notes that went to the UK cabinet, which was in the hundreds in a year, which therefore says that too many matters go to the cabinet for decision-making, and therefore there is not enough decision-making at the level of the ministries once it is consistent with government policy and the law, of course, and the Constitution. And therefore more decisions have to be taken within a ministry by the minister, by the permanent secretary, who is the person who manages the ministry, and therefore all the way down to the level of the clerks in a ministry. And so part of decision making and therefore efficiency, you have to remove this culture of everything having to go to the cabinet. And it can be done because it's done in other systems of government that are somewhat similar to ours. But we have this culture that the boss man or boss lady has to know everything, so everything has to go to cabinet, and nothing could be done unless cabinet signs off, which means the prime minister signs off. We have to change that culture if we are to get efficiency. It's not about putting a ministry or somebody responsible as a hatchet person to drive efficiency. It is really about how decisions get made and how those decisions get implemented. And that culture could change. That has to change.
Mm-hmm. And that's, yeah, I really enjoy that. So what are the first couple of things, as we wrap up, first couple of things that the Prasad Bisasa-led government needs to do to remain in good public perception?
And that's a difficult one. She has indicated certain things, the stand your ground and home invasion law and so on. I suppose that will help her because those are things that she had committed to and promised, and people say she delivered on that. Those would not necessarily be my priorities. My priorities would be in other areas. Labor legislation would be important. Resolving the long outstanding wage and salary negotiations for public servants and people in state enterprises and statutory bodies. Those will be some of those issues that I think need to be addressed. Quite clearly, the energy sector, getting, natural gas to the downstream plants as soon as possible, and clear timelines and accountability and transparency in those things, that will be important. And some of the other things that we have spoken about, the more general things of constitutional reform and things like that. She would obviously have to deliver on some of the immediate reliefs to people. She talked about the baby grant and things like that. That is important. And making more efficient the delivery of other social services. There's a lot of bureaucracy in the delivery of social services, but also making sure that there is no corruption involved, so that people who should not get a food card, that doesn't happen, that people who really need it get it, and it is delivered in a timely way. Those things are important things to relieve some of the immediate pressures on people's daily lives. Certainly people need to have a sense of relief that their lives are getting a little better as a result of the change in government.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Abdullah, for coming on and sharing your very insightful thoughts with us on the cabinet picks and, of course, the more general things you would have spoken about.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. We do hope that you have a beautiful day, and that you come back on soon enough for us to have more conversations like these.
Yeah, my last activity today is a program sometime after 8 o'clock tonight with a radio station of the islands in St. Vincent, where we're discussing some of these same issues.
Yes, so I'm so glad that we got to start off your day. Thanks for spending it with us. Do have a great day.
Thanks, Jada and Naomi. Thanks.
Of course. All right, so we're just going to take a short break and we'll be right back with you. Stay with us.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. a father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title. It's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movie Town, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to.
Kind of a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim, right, or the man who's being victim. Exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'd ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say, we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, so here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh. Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
let's go to the last part.
Welcome back to the program this morning. So we are going to get straight into some news updates that we have for you. The first one being Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Visasa has confirmed that the highly anticipated dragon gas deal with Venezuela is officially off the table. So that's some big news. This brings an end to years of speculation, diplomacy, and waiting. So have a look at this video of where she announces that.
A government in place in Trinidad and Tobago, and the first order of business is boots on the ground and get to work. we have a lot of work to do.
Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar made several surprise announcements following the swearing-in of her cabinet on Saturday. Among them were the Stand Your Ground laws and home invasion laws, as well as granting firearm users licenses to law-abiding citizens. But one that stood out the most was TNT's push in the energy industry, Greendot, to be precise.
But I have a surprise for you. I intend to send my Minister of Energy to Greendot, because I'm being told that Greendot offshore has more gas and oil than the Dragon field. So shall we explore that?
The Prime Minister said her administration would not move forward with the previous government's Dragon gas deal.
That is dead. It is dead. They kept it alive for 10 years. And they couldn't do that in 10 years. Let's look right in the ground. As I mentioned, Greendot, Guyana, Suriname.
Meanwhile, Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, Dr. Rudal Munilal, said it's his intention to position TNT as the energy capital of the Caribbean.
Even before the swearing-in, the Guyanese government and officials there have expressed interest in having arrangements with Trinidad and Tobago and discussions pertaining to gas. And it is something that we will quickly engage the government and the relevant officials in Guyana.
And with regard to the Oando deal with the Point-of-Pay refinery, Dr. Munilal said it is on his agenda and would also pursue an independent assessment of the state of the refinery.
And on Monday, we'll be calling for all notes and minutes and reports of all the meetings that Mr. Stuart Young and Dr. Rowley attended pertaining to the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. I will be reviewing any and all arrangements with the entity that was being proposed to buy, lease, take the refinery.
Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar though assured that it is government's intention and promise to reopen the refinery.
We're committed to opening it. We have to do feasibility studies, and that is good.
Dr. Munilal though said government will work with the trade unions to reopen the refinery, but noted that it may require a capital injection, and he's promised to reveal all on the Oando deal.
As you know, it has been a secret deal. On Monday morning, there are no secrets from me, so that we will get all the facts and I will brief the Prime Minister and take action.
Sonolala, TTT News.
Well, we will definitely be holding Minister Munilal to that statement come Monday morning. There will be no secrets from him. So he's planning to be as transparent as he possibly can. So we will definitely be keeping a close eye on this deal. And so just a bit of a background on it. The Dragon gas deal is what former Prime Minister, Minister Stuart Young, had attempted to negotiate to completion with Venezuela. If you remember, the deal was shelved due to the revocation of our OFAC license by the U.S. So what would have happened is the OFAC license is granted to us for the Dragon and Coquina Mannequin gas fields were revoked. So that officially means that Shell, BP, NGC cannot move forward with plans to develop and export natural gas from these Venezuelan fields, which impacted a lot of our economic security and our economic opportunities. So what was happening was that the PNM government, they were trying to find some way to reverse or to kind of find a way around it, but we didn't hear back from that in time. So now that the new government is in power, they said that it is done and over with. So moving on to other opportunities. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. When she made that announcement, we were all extremely, I think we were excited, we were shocked, but it is something that I hope works out in our favor. Mm-hmm. So what you said is the Dragon gas is dead. Okay, it's dead, it's gone. We're not doing that anymore. Which, I mean, it was strong of her to come out and say that, so now we know where we stand, and we know what they're looking towards doing, so we now can hold them to account for that. So they're looking to Guyana and Suriname and Grenada, my apologies. So we're yet to see where that is leading, but we have hope that they do what's best for the country and that we can hear some updates from this soon enough, because it is Monday morning, so we could start to hold them to account from now. All right, so we're going to move on to another update for you guys. International news now. We're looking at Temu and Shein. So when it comes to Trump's tariffs, we have these bargain giants, Temu and Shein, starting to feel the pinch of tariffs. The result, rising prices for consumers. I'm sure we've all seen this online, especially the Gen Z shoppers who made these platforms a global trend. Now, your carts, the prices have gone up tremendously. I've seen it myself. I have friends who have seen it themselves. There's a huge difference in the price change. So have a look at this video.
This 3-pack of men's athletic shorts went from $23 to $56 after retailer Temu added a more than $32 import charge into the shopping cart.
My $18 free shipping Temu order that I tried to place last night had a $27 import charge.
Over at Shein, prices rising too.
Has anyone looked at their Shein cart this morning?
Both posting nearly identical notices to customers, blaming, quote, recent changes in global trade rules and tariffs. After the Trump administration closed a loophole that allowed duty-free shipment of low-cost Chinese goods directly to U.S. households, they'll now carry a 120% tariff or $100 shipping fee, rising to $200 in June. These products so cheap even with these higher costs, many of them are still less expensive than U.S.-made goods. It's an early look at how the U.S.-China trade war will bring border taxes to Americans' bottom lines. President Trump says the two sides are negotiating, and the Treasury Secretary today said the next move is China's.
It's up to China to de-escalate because they sell 5 times more to us than we sell to them. And so these 125, 145% tariffs are unsustainable.
A Chinese official disputing the White House account, saying China and the U.S. have not conducted consultations or negotiations on the tariffs issue.
And Christine, where do we stand right now in negotiations?
Well, the Treasury Secretary today suggested progress with India in negotiating a new trade deal. But a reminder here, frankly, that sometimes it can take a couple of years to make a deal. And there's just 72 days left in the president's pause on all those extra tariffs on so many countries, Lester.
All right, Christine, thanks much.
So I think one of the biggest questions that we have right now is this the end of ultra cheap fashion, which is what Shein and Temu brought for us? You know, would we have to now look at shopping locally? You know, because this is something that it is affecting us in the Caribbean as well, and we didn't think it would. You know, but especially when you're shopping from these, I think they call it quick fashion, fast fashion. A lot of their items, a lot of their goods come from China. You know, lower rate, which is why these costs were so cheap. Even though we're buying it from Trinidad online, and it seems to be a U.S.-based company. They are bringing in all of their items from China. So now that the cost has gone up, I don't think Shein or Temu would be considered affordable.
So this is an inevitable fallout from the Biden administration, their decision to end the de minimis exemption and revive steep tariffs on issues from China into the U.S. So what would have happened is they put out a notice that says, due to recent changes in global trade rules and tariffs, our operating expenses have gone up. So we will be making price adjustments. Another news source, Bloomberg News, told us that price surges across both platforms. It finds some items have spiked by more than 300%, because, you know, as I said, they're putting on $100 on the tariff. So China right now has tariffs of 125%, and I believe the U.S. is 120%. So that trade war continues to cause a lot of price hikes and everything, but especially now fast fashion is being affected. So fast fashion gone with the wind.
It might be no more, unfortunately.
Because that's the only reason you were shopping on those sites. The quality of, say, the clothes and stuff you get wasn't always the I wouldn't say it wasn't the best.
It was
like,
good enough
yeah.
for the price point, but now you're not getting, you're paying more for, and the quality is not changing, so that would become a problem. Yeah, I think this will lead us into our next news update. So there is a possible break in the trade war, and this could be a turning point. And we're looking at the world's two largest economies. New developments suggest that Beijing and Washington may be softening their stance. So this was something that we touched on, I think it was last week, and where Washington was saying that they have been in discussion with Beijing, and then China said, no, we haven't heard anything from them, but now that whole plot has changed, and Beijing is saying, yes, we have spoken with Washington, so have a look.
Its position in the trade war with the United States. Beijing is said to be evaluating an American offer to negotiate. This comes as a new round of auto tariffs goes into effect. Here's ABC senior White House correspondent Selena Wang.
For the first time since President Trump slapped steep tariffs on goods from China, tonight new signs they may be open to negotiations with the White House. Beijing says it's evaluating possible trade talks after senior U.S. officials reached out through relevant parties multiple times. This comes after Beijing repeatedly flat out denied Trump's claims that the U.S. was talking to China and that he had spoken to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. But Beijing insists Trump's staggering 145% tariffs must be eliminated first. China's Commerce Ministry says if the U.S. doesn't, it means that the United States has no sincerity at all and will further damage the mutual trust between both sides. The standoff continues as tariffs keep piling on. Starting today, Trump's 25% tariffs on most car parts go into effect after he already imposed the same tariff rate on imported cars last month. The impact is sweeping. Even cars made here in the USA rely on parts from around the world. Economists warn this could raise car prices by thousands of dollars. General Motors CEO warning the tariffs will cost some $4 to $5 billion.
When we look at the overall $4 to $5 billion impact from tariffs that we shared, that is what we know now based on the clarity we're given.
The president appearing to downplay fears the country is headed towards a recession.
Look, everything's okay. What we are, I said, this is a transition period. I think we're going to do fantastically.
And today, America's most well-known investor criticizing Trump's trade policy.
Trade should not be a weapon. We should be looking to trade with the rest of the world, and we should do what we do best, and they should do what they do best.
The Trump administration also closing a trade loophole that allowed goods valued at $800 or less to enter the U.S. tax-free. Those packages now face 120% tariffs or a $100 package fee. That fee increases to $200 on June 1st.
People are worried, even some people who voted for you saying, I didn't sign up for this. So how do you answer those concerns?
Well, they did sign up for it, actually, and this is what I campaigned on.
And when it comes to the U.S.-China trade war, both countries are feeling the pain. America's economy shrank for the first time since the pandemic as companies rushed to import goods to get ahead of those tariffs, and manufacturing in China dropped to the lowest level in 16 months. Whit?
Selena Wang.
So this, though, could bring extreme relief to global markets, especially here in the Caribbean, where we're caught in the ripple effect, of these rising import costs and supply chain volatility. But then it still leaves the question, what does softening tensions really mean? Mm-hmm. It's not that they have come to an agreement and created a deal. No softening tensions. Mm-hmm. Where does that leave us? It's not specific to anything. It still leaves everything up in the air. Mm-hmm. For any kind of impression or to make an assumption, but
all that tells us is that now that both countries are aware that really need to come to an agreement. Because what's happening is that China, personally, I don't think China has really needed to soften their stance. They've always been pretty consistent in their messaging. Treat me with some respect, lower the tariffs, and we can be good. But don't lie or be insincere and say that we spoke when we didn't speak. We reached an agreement, we didn't reach an agreement. Because it feels like China is at the table and they're waiting on the U.S. to come and say, well, okay, this is what I will do. I will lower my price here, I'll lower my tariff cost here, and you can lower yours here, and we can reach an agreement. So we reached nowhere. No. As you said, we reached nowhere. It was just suspicions that we would have had a bit of a...
There's a possibility they can reach an agreement, but based on how the discussions are going and, the stance that China has now, I think we're not going to see it very soon.
It's a
but
stubborn stance.
Yeah,
they're unmoving, and they've been like that. They've said that. They've been like that for a good amount of time since the beginning of this.
It's causing a lot of damage.
It is.
So they do need to, which is why I think they're open to having the discussions now, even though Trump is not showing any signs of wanting to lower the tariffs, because he still believes that this is the best thing for America.
Yeah.
But it is going to cause a lot of damage economic-wise,
So it's like we're waiting it's like we're in the middle of a parental divorce. The rest of the countries are waiting for them to make up so that we can have some sort of stability. Because right now we really don't. We really don't.
The Amazon, you have it?
Yes, it was a recent development. Amazon, the big economic giant, has refuted reports suggesting it planned to display tariff costs alongside product prices on its main website. So this is a controversy that began after a certain news article, Punch Bowl, claimed that Amazon intended to show how tariffs, particularly those affected by the Trump administration, were affecting product prices. So it prompted a little bit of a criticism from the White House, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt labeling the alleged move as a hostile and political act by Amazon. So she came out and she was like, yes, I'm naming that that's hostile. It's a hostile and political act. And then Jeff Bezos came out and said that this was never approved and it's not going to happen. So he would have indicated that it was not on their main platform, but on their platform, Amazon Hall, that they're going to list the prices. Because, I think it's fair for companies to do that.
Yeah, I don't see why that was such a problem for Amazon to do that, and even for Jeff Bezos to come out and say, because he got scared, like he's like, no, we're not doing that, that's not happening, that wasn't approved. But I don't see an issue with doing that, because your prices are going to increase, and we as the consumers want to know, make it make sense. At what point or how much more are these prices? What is the percent, the tariff that you're getting on importing these goods, and then now your sale point, why the difference? So that is what they were saying, we're going to put a price, we're going to put the percentage difference.
Because if it is, I want to buy this pen, I see this real nice pen on Amazon, and this price is $2. But now you're telling me when I go to checkout that it's now $6. Why? I want to know why.
Where did the $4 come from?
Where did the additional $4 come from? And then I want to be able to go back and say, due to tariffs. But I think the reason why, and it's pretty obvious, the reason why they don't want it is because they know that U.S. consumers are going to be like, so these tariffs are actually really a bad thing. We're paying the cost of it, not necessarily the company, or the company is passing along the cost to us. So this is bad for us. And then they would...
The thing is, it's the government that's getting the money that is benefiting, which is what a tariff is. It's a benefit to the government, but it's not a benefit to the people.
So when Trump came in office, he would have, during his campaign trail, he would have told the American public that they're in for a little bit, because of the tariffs, they would be in for a little bit of they're gonna need some adjustments, because it's going to be a little bit of a hard time. And then they would have gone around to some news stations, CNN and so on, would have gone around to interview members of the public, and they would have asked them, Trump supporters specifically, they would have asked them, how do you feel about the tariff war? And they said, oh, we're feeling a little bit of a pinch, but we're okay with this. Donald Trump knows what he's doing, and so on and so forth. Which, I mean, we have something else to show on that. So we want to...
Trump did yesterday, he did a sit down with media press.
Yes.
And it was the interview lasted about an hour and 45 minutes around there. But we were able to get some little excerpts and clips from that interview because it was very extensive. I think he put his foot in his mouth a few times throughout the interview. There was a point where he spoke about these tariffs, and he said, you know, the American consumer does not need $30. You know, why not have $3 or $5? But you don't need, he said, I don't think a little girl, 11 years old, needs multiple or a lot of dolls, because it came up in a conversation where with China, that the cost of toys and dolls and things for kids have increased a lot, and the American consumer cannot afford these things. And he's saying, well, no, you don't need multiple of these items. You don't need X number of pens. Yes. Yeah, you just need 2 or 3, you know, like in that way. So I think we got the video for that. The Trump defend, but this was in a conversation where Trump defended his second-term agenda.
Mm-hmm. So we can probably start to queue up that video. But I just find it interesting because American consumerism does need to be addressed. But that's the thing. Their market, the economy is built on being a consumer market. They earn enough money to be able to go out into the market and say, I'm buying this from China, I'm buying this from Trinidad and Tobago, I'm buying this from Venezuela, I'm buying this from other countries. So they are a consumer market. But American consumerism has been out of hand for quite some time. And I believe if we have that video queued up, yeah.
3 months into office, President Trump isn't willing to fully commit to taking ownership over the economy.
When does it become the Trump economy? It partially is right now, and I really mean this. I think the good parts are the Trump economy, and the bad parts are the Biden economy, because he's done a terrible job. He did a terrible job on everything.
So let's talk about the tariffs. And I want to ask you about something you said this week. Got a lot of attention. You were at your cabinet meeting. You said, quote, I'm going to quote what you said, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30.
Yeah.
And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. Are you saying that your tariffs will cause some prices to go up?
No, I think the tariffs are going to be great for us because it's going to make us rich.
But you said some dolls are going to cost more. Isn't that an acknowledgement that some prices will go up?
I don't think a beautiful baby girl that's 11 years old needs to have 30 dolls. I think they can have 3 dolls or 4 dolls. Because what we were doing with China was just unbelievable. We had a trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars with China.
When you say they could have $3 instead of $30, are you saying Americans could see empty store shelves?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they don't need to have $30. They can have 3. They don't need to have 250 pencils. They can have 5.
Is it okay in the short term to have a recession?
This. Look, yeah, everything's okay. What we are, I said, this is a transition period. I think we're going to do fantastically.
The president's first 100 days also marked by his immigration crackdown and mass deportation efforts. Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It seems. It might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth, some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
And Kristen is joining us here on set. It's good to see you.
Great to be here, Hallie.
You also asked the president about his political future, given those Trump 2028 hats his organization is selling. But of course, the Constitution prohibits a third term. What do you tell you about that?
Well, the hats are fueling speculation about what he's thinking about a third term. In his most definitive statements yet, Hallie, the president said he's not interested in trying to find a way to circumvent the Constitution for a third term. He said he's focused on the next 4 years. I pressed him on who does he see as his successor. He named the vice president and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, notably.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC.
Yeah. So I think we're likely seeing the tone of the 2025 campaign kind of ruling out here.
I would love to be a master of language manipulation like that. So he would have said before, some dolls are going to go up in price, so they're going to be more expensive. So the reporter said, so prices are going to go up. Trump, no, we're going to be rich. I want you guys to let that sit with you for a little bit, because he is contradicting himself. He is contradicting himself, but he is able to say it in such a way that makes it seem like if he's he has a plan. And, you know, maybe he does, and that's what I would leave that at. But I also wanted to go into something else that he would have said about some of the price hikes. Yeah. I'll come back to that in a bit.
As a president, you cannot make a comment. I think it's unethical to make a comment like that, because who are you to say somebody cannot have 350 pence or $30? At the end of the day, it's in the interest of the economy and the people in the economy to purchase these things. That's what it's there for. But then you're gonna hike up the prices already hiked up because of these tariffs that you're putting on these products, and then the average consumer now cannot afford to purchase any of these items. But then you're saying, oh no, it's a good thing, and it's okay, but you don't need so many things. You don't need to buy $30, you don't need to buy 350 pence. You just need 5, or you just need $2 to $3. Why would you say something like that?
I would encourage you all to go and watch that interview. You could probably get the name of the interview for them. But there was something else mentioned in the interview that I wanted to highlight. When he was pressed about whether or not some people felt as though he was going against what he was campaigning for. So they were confused as to why they were going through all of this hardship when you said that you were going to make America great again. His response to that was, well, I am doing what I said I was going to do. That's what you voted for.
Well,
that's what you voted for. And I find it powerful. I find it powerful because he's aware. He's aware. Because a lot of people were saying that they wanted America to be great again. They were going to be in good spirits, and everything was going to be made better. That's what he campaigned on. Yeah. And now he's saying, well, no, you actually voted for the hardship. You voted for this to be done.
The thing what people don't realize, we have to remember he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And I think maybe we didn't realize what the impact of it would have been.
But we were warned.
But we were warned. I think the entire world was warned. And it's making America great again. The tariffs are what the government needs, and it makes the government money. That is what a tariff is. So we will feel the brunt of it. The consumer. The tariff is not for the consumer, the tariff is for the government body. It is what gives them money, and that is the whole point now, what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to, which is why I think too he doesn't want to back down with that deal with China, because China is, well, the biggest supplier to the United States. So, putting 145% tariff.
Yeah.
So it's a bit intense, but he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. I think, though, there are discussions, he does need to tone it down a bit. But again, we will continue to give you the updates on it and keep a close eye on what's happening if they come to an agreement.
Which I suspect, honestly, would be soon, because this is a bit too intense for the global economy. So they will start to feel the brunt of it from other smaller nations, and even the larger ones around them. They will start to feel the call from them.
Yeah.
To come to an agreement and to lessen the economic burden on the world.
Yeah.
So
I think we have one more. Okay. We can do one more before we wrap up, and this is the Trump is saying that, one sec. He said maybe it's not possible to come to a peace deal with Ukraine and Russia. So we're going to take a look at that video and come back.
Foreign policy, sir. You just signed a minerals deal with Ukraine. It's a sign, it seems, that the United States is invested in Ukraine's future. The Secretary of State told me this is a very critical week. Are you any closer to reaching a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia?
I hope so.
How would you characterize
I do believe we're closer with one party and maybe not as close with the other, but we'll have to see. I'd like to not say which one we're closer to, but we did do a deal for the American people that was good. We were able to get rare earth. You know, the Europeans are getting paid back. They have a loan. We didn't. Biden just gave them $350 billion. He has no idea where the money is, what happened. And at least we'll, in one form or another, get our, I don't feel so foolish. And remember this is Biden's war. This was a war that was never going to happen if I were president. This is a horrible, horrible war. And I get to see shots of soldiers through, satellite that are just so terrible. 5,000 soldiers are being, 5,000 soldiers a week on average are dying. They're not American soldiers, but I want to solve the problem. They're Russian soldiers and they're Ukrainian soldiers. And if I can save 5,000 souls, I just love doing it.
How long do you give both countries before you're going to walk away?
Well, there'll be a time when I will say, okay, keep going, keep being stupid.
When does that come? Are you close to it?
Sometimes I get close to it and then positive things happen, okay?
What's the red line for you? At what point do you say, that's it, we're walking away?
Well, you'll know. I mean, there'll be a time when I may say that. And if I do, there may be something I can't, maybe it's not possible to do. There's tremendous hatred, just so you understand. Kristen, we're talking tremendous hatred between these two men and between, some of the soldiers, frankly, between the generals. They've been fighting hard for 3 years. I think we have a very good chance of doing it.
When they make progress, things happen that changes that. So at this point, they're at a point where they're not sure. Both sides. He was not specific as to which side they were having conversations with or coming to an agreement with. But we do understand that we can make an assumption and suspect who it is. Yes. I think we can all come to the same assumption. But he did not want to specify that. So it seems as though one side is willing to negotiate, one side is willing to work with them, but the other side does not.
So just a little bit about the minerals deal. It's a deal that gives Washington access to some of the war-torn countries' natural resources. So it sets up an investment fund that Ukraine hopes will cement U.S. assistance for 3 years after the Russian invasion that would have started the war.
Yeah, and I absolutely admire that he took zero accountability for what is happening over there. He said this is the Biden administration from the jump. He said, no,
what else
this is not me.
U.S. President Donald Trump. What else should we expect? But I mean, honestly, he's given us a lot of news, a lot of things to talk about. And in this, one thing we can expect with him, it's news.
Yes. So that sit down with Meet the Press yesterday, it was a very enjoyable watch. I think we can all have a look at that because it was the way he speaks and just the information that was brought out during that interview. Definitely go and take a look at it. It's on YouTube.
So it's called Donald Trump Sits Down with Meet the Press.
Meet the Press exclusive.
So. All right. So that brings us to the end of our show for today. As per usual, you can always go on to our Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, YouTube, and our website, where you can leave your comments to engage with us here on AM Prime. So it's at WESN-CC on everything.
And as usual, before we go, we have a quote for you. This morning's quote reads, "You don't have to see the whole path, just take the step. Just take the next step with purpose." So I think that is a beautiful way to start our week. So steps with purpose. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, stay inspired, stay informed, and we'll see you back here again tomorrow morning. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
WESN.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial dentures. Remember, you don't have to brush and floss all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today. SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands, and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we're different criminals and we manipulated the law and we're exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
we are tackling the hard-hitting topics. Some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we kind of at a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
WESN.
Bonjour tout le monde. And that's about all the French I remember from for French. Now, it's been a while, of course. Big things happened over the weekend. To some extent, they offer new hope. But on the other hand, perhaps there's still questions, and we'll get into that a little bit later. One of the things I find interesting, and I wanted to address it at the top, because it's not really a technical question per se or an issue that we could bite into, but it is part of something that's spilling over from the election, I guess you could say. The fact of the matter is we have, I think, far too much a tendency here in TNT to just throw accusations out there without context, potentially without evidence, and at times, it gets people into trouble. It causes us to misunderstand what's going on. And then, when our expectations are not met, causes us to perceive the situation negatively. Well, one example, of course, is, and this is a parallel example, someone decided to arrest the commissioner of police. We still don't know what law was broken. We know what reasons were potentially offered, but even then, we don't really have a good grasp on how, to what extent those reasons are a crime, to those reasons justify an arrest. Now, allegations, and one of my contributors put me onto this over the weekend, and I found it was kind of silly and ridiculous with limited context, but even now with more context, I'm still wondering what is the point, and that is with regards to allegations of secret and possibly improper borrowing by Stuart Young and the government in the lead up to the last general election. Now, I understand that anything an unpopular government that has a lack of transparency and accountability already, and controversial issues already, they're not going to have the benefit of the doubt, and you're going to assume the worst. I get that. I myself, over time, more and more, could no longer hope for the best, assume the best. I had to assume the worst too. Apparently, it's 5 loans totaling $1.5 billion. Not sure if it is TT or US. Now, all we have, and apparently the person that made the allegations, Kennelly, he has paperwork to show that the loans are real. Now, Stuart Young himself did not deny that the loans are real. He's saying that Vishnu Dan Paul didn't take out these loans. This was done by under Colin Burt as Minister of Finance and by the Ministry of Finance And this was part of government business. And he stated there was nothing secret about it. We took out loans. Wasn't the first time. Now, of course, what the timing of the loans are, I'm not entirely sure, because the allegations say it would have been done while Stuart Young was Prime Minister and Vishnu Danpal was Minister of Finance. But let's just even say that is true. And while I would be on board to question the timing of it being potentially unethical, of course, if the country needed liquid cash to do things, or financial resources to do something, and I'm not talking, there was no new projects that were announced in those 5 weeks per se, and money and contracts I don't believe were awarded in those 5 weeks. And if there were, anything like that may be considered unethical. But if it was the case of, well, we need cash to pay something that is recurring, that we would have to pay regardless, cash to help pay salaries, I don't know what it was for. We could question the fact that we needed a loan, because that's the implication of the defense. Why is that the case? We could question maybe the ethics of taking out the loan if it wasn't necessary, given that we had an interim 5-week government, 5-week cabinet. But we don't really have anything to say that these loans were for any nefarious purpose. Because then the question I have to ask is, similar to the arrest of the Commissioner of Police, what was the law that was broken here? Because Mr. Ali is saying that his post on social media, given his commentary on the issue, it generated discussion and debate, skepticism, denial, and a fair sprinkling of character assassination from loyalists. And he has what he calls are the relevant documents. That's fine. But the documents that prove the loans exist don't really mean anything. Stuart Young and shying away from the fact that the loans exist. I'm sure, or I assume, the rest of the PNM is not going to shy away from the fact that the loans exist. And the fact that the loans exist doesn't mean anything. What bad thing was done with these loans, or was done in the process of getting these loans? You need to kind of give me some help files here. Because if we can't just go around setting a precedent now where we just assume whatever the previous administration was bad, or whatever the previous government was bad, because that sets a standard of judgment that the incoming administration eventually is going to run headfirst into, that all future governments are going to run headfirst into. That as a standard is going to potentially interfere with our own principles, guilty even without a stated crime. And that's why I put it in parallel with the Commissioner of Police. I don't like the Commissioner of Police as a commissioner. I don't find she did a good job. I don't find she deserved to remain in that post for as long as she did. But that is, by the way, just because I don't like her doesn't mean that it's justifiable to arrest her. And we don't even know why. To trample on her rights and her personal dignity, and we don't even know why. Her reputation as a commissioner of police is not the same thing as her reputation as a law-abiding citizen of TNT. And maybe she has broken laws or done things that have gone against the ethical and moral code of the police service. I don't know. But the arrest did nothing to put forward anything substantial to make a case that she did anything wrong. So much so that DPP basically had to say, meh, I'm not involved with that. You don't have enough. We'll and come again. We don't, just because we don't like Stuart Young, and I'm saying that generally rhetorically. I don't have a personal dislike or like for the man. But let's just say, given the election results, the country now basically doesn't like Stuart Young. That's the popularity contest of an election. That doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, he took out loans, so we must hate him and condemn him for taking out loans. I have no problem if there's anything substantial, and then We take the evidence to the relevant authorities and we pursue the matter through the proper legal channels. But this court of public opinion nonsense, where accusations, and look, it was done throughout the campaign and now it's being done again, and I get it. Literally right now, internal politics of the PNM started immediately. This is not too dissimilar, if not almost the exact same thing, just different players to what happened in 2010. So there are stakes here. It's not just Stuart Young was voted out and now they're going after. No, there are tangible stakes here. I get it. The lessons of 2010, the PNM and the UNC is that you need to start considering your campaigning immediately after the last election. Because the UNC were campaigning for years. That's why they seemed more ready than the PNM. Even though the PNM called the date, the UNC was already doing meetings for years. It didn't take much effort to transition their campaigning machinery to an actual election campaign machinery. So there are stakes in this. I understand. But accusations without even anything substantial to say what the wrongdoing was, if that's the new standard in our public discourse, well then it's setting up everybody for failure. Everybody. At some point, and we need to remember this, standards and precedents set will eventually be applied to your side. That is what politics in America and around the world, but especially America, is kind of showing to the politicians. You could only get away with one-sided finger pointing and one-sided fake principles for so long until the public realizes, wait, this is not a universal principle. This is a biased ideology. Now, I'm not saying that this is a UNC character assassination of Stuart Young. I'm not saying that. I don't know, Mr. Ali, what his motivations were or were not. And perhaps there is some wrongdoing in there somewhere, but that's not, I haven't necessarily seen anything of anything. Stuart Young says the loans were not secretive. They followed proper procedure. I believe if Mr. Ali has documentation that the loans exist, it's a little bit doubtful that they were secretive and did not follow proper procedure if they have irrelevant documents, right? Like a little bit more with the help files. Are these the wrong documents? Are these improper? Because allegations without proof at this point, it's frustrating me to no end because the public will take it and run with it. Case in point, it's not that $3 billion is missing. It's that revenue was, in the words of the then Minister of Finance, underreported by the Auditor General. That is to say, Coleman Bid wanted to say revenue was $2.5 to $3 billion more than it was, according to the Auditor General. That is not the same thing as money missing. Now, the actual reason for default, I have no idea at this point, because that is just one thing that the current administration has to get into. A couple other things to mention. First of all, it was World Press Freedom Day not too long ago, which is very interesting given that we had a very critical election, and of course the results, when we're not a Rowley dictatorship, I guess that's safe to say, right? One of the things is about World Press Freedom Day is they're looking for media institutions to potentially use artificial intelligence, or what is the impact of artificial intelligence. I think a lot of people talk about artificial intelligence and not really understanding what it is. That's what it comes across like to me. For the press utilizing it, I will just have one word of caution. You could use AI to help you write and to help you search, right? That's basically what it is. The problem in that is that sometimes the searches could be wrong. It could be misleading. You need to double check everything. So you still need to know your stuff. And you still need to have the capacity to do your own research, if only to double check. But it's a nice shortcut. It points you potentially sometimes in the right direction. It can also help you write. Not always is it going to write a great thing. You still need to read it back, go through it with a fine-tooth comb, make sure there's no information in there that might be false, incorrect, misleading. The grammar, the context, etc. might be incorrect, misleading. You need to double check all of that. AI is a tool that will assist someone that knows what they're doing. You could only fake so much with AI. If you become over-reliant on AI, eventually you will get caught because something with a big mistake will be published by you, and then you'll see. Granted, if we're speaking about grammatical errors, that happens all the time in our local newspapers. And to be fair, most TV and radio people probably don't speak with correct, proper grammar, pronunciation, etc., etc. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. One of the last things I want to get to before we take the break. One of the daily newspapers, I'll say Guardian in this case, they have an interesting article comparing Dr. Rowley to Mr. Manning, because both had to reform the PNM after a disastrous loss. Now, in the case of Mr. Manning, it was 33-3, I believe. In the case of Dr. Rowley, it was a 12-member opposition back in the day when the partnership came out on top. So it was a little bit worse than what Penelope Beckles finds herself in now. But the article has a lot of different speakers, some of whom condemn Dr. Rowley and compare him negatively to Mr. Manning, some of whom are realistic and acknowledge the fact that Mr. Manning himself potentially was a little bit more aloof in that last term and made mistakes that led directly to the result. Now, were his mistakes as bad, worse, or not as bad as the perceived mistakes of Dr. Keith Rowley in this last year, give or take, or this last 4 to 6 months? I mean, that's debatable. One of the interesting things, I believe, for lack of a better term, a former member of the PNM, a former deputy political leader, and someone who has worked with Dr. Rowley in some capacity, did point out to the fact that there was a softer side to him too, which I actually do believe is true. Whenever he allowed himself to be genuine and not genuinely raucous and bombastic, there were signs of a good leader there. Unfortunately, we didn't see those signs enough. And criticisms of his leadership style, at the end of the day, are valid given the results. One of the things that I guess I will never understand, because even if it was purely out of greed, it still doesn't really make any sense in the grand scheme of things. This is assuming that Dr. Rowley and the people who he does consult with are intelligent people. Why taking the wage increase seemed like a good idea for them to do last year? Why? In what world would that ever have been a decision that would not come to undermine basically the entire re-election campaign, regardless of who was in charge? Because it's not as though you're going to get a newcomer to be the political leader. It's going to be somebody with ties to the previous administration. So as much as Mr. Manning seemed aloof towards the end there, and Dr. Rowley had to come and pick up the pieces, part of the parallels to that situation is that Dr. Rowley himself seemingly was out of touch like Mr. Manning. In some ways, maybe even worse. But he had all his faculties there. What went wrong? Critics will argue, well, he was never a good leader to begin with, regardless of his skills, regardless of whatever charisma that he had. And I guess this is one of those things where The PNM needs to kind of be serious now. We criticized the UNC as opposition for years here on Talking Point. But at the very least, you could say that they bucked up and stepped up their game for that election campaign. And some of the cabinet appointments reflect that. Some, maybe not so much, but I won't necessarily go into those yet. It's one of those things where they have to kind of need proof to say it was ultimately bad. We'll give some benefit of the doubt to a new administration. Of course, it has to be reasonable. But Penelope Beckles, ironically, one of the things that the article I don't think really gets into the fact that Penelope Beckles finds herself in almost the exact same situation that Dr. Keith Rowley found himself. And now the question is, will history repeat itself? The PNM needs to understand that its approach to things led to this result. And it wasn't necessarily just the approach of one man. One could argue that Mr. Manning ultimately was responsible for his final defeat. Given the snap election call, given how aloof he was acting towards the end and how that rubbed a lot of people, not just party people, but people third party to politics the wrong way. I have already seen hints that perhaps the PNM haven't really learned their lesson, taken the bitter pill that Dr. Brown mentioned. Got off to a bad foot when Stuart Young is posting a picture of himself on the beach right after the election, basically saying, doesn't matter to me. He's not feeling nothing. Now, to some extent, they are supporters of the PNM who were granted jobs for political reasons, or maybe not for political reasons, but they are supporters of the PNM. And they are afraid for their livelihood. That's the stakes for some people in an election. Stuart Young's going to get an MP salary. He has a prime ministerial pension when he's not serving in Parliament. He's fine. And now he wants to continue to engage on the ground, which is funny because, you know, as much as you were prime minister, it might have helped for you to engage on the ground, just saying. And dare I wonder, the defiance that we saw in his part of the concession speech, if it's just a continuation of some of the bad decisions and poor stances and poor perspectives of a political party that lost so much support, it depressed the total voter turnout on its own. On their own, the UNC voter base increased. 100,000 plus votes lost when the two parties got 300,000 plus last year. That's a lot. That's 2/3 of your support decided to abandon you. If that's not a wake-up call, and if you don't learn something from this, well, then you deserve what you get. The problem is, and I said this when the UNC is in opposition, a weak opposition will allow any government to get away with rhetorical murder. The last thing we need is another weak opposition, or dare I say weaker opposition than what we had for the last 10 years. Complacency is a hell of a thing. The question is, if the opposition is that bad, could the population somehow figure out a way to compensate for it? I don't expect that to happen. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into the preliminary commentary of the new cabinet. Stay tuned. Shawn Michael Small, this is Talking About on WSM. We'll be right back after this.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call, at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
Where good private health care is affordable.
The fluid retention occurs in the lungs and they get short of breath, particularly with exertion. And it's a particularly condition where when lying down, they feel short of breath and have to use a lot of pillows. That's a sign that the shortness of breath might be due to heart failure.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
To the Daily Review, just want to say some people might think I was schizophrenic. I was defending Stuart Young and then criticized him. I was defending him based on the fact that there wasn't enough evidence. And again, to highlight the point, just because we might not like what someone has done doesn't give us carte blanche to label him as an enemy. Now, the opposition, well, it's going to take some getting used to. It's been 4 years I've been calling Kamala Harris the opposition leader. Now I have to remember Prime Minister. Everything, of course, flips. New cabinet. One of the things that I actually help, you don't necessarily have to get used to it, is the fact that some of the ministries, they've been reworked, relabeled, responsibilities and portfolios have been shifted around, they've been renamed, and it makes an interesting topic of conversation because to some extent, it seems like if it's just window dressing, the former Attorney General made that point. To some extent, however, moving things around, there's pros and cons to it. So let's get into that with the new cabinet, 35 members. I'm not too sure if 32 members were sworn in yesterday, but apparently there are 3 members to be sworn in, most notably a Minister of Trade, Investment and Tourism. Of course, national security was split into Homeland Security, National Defense, and I believe Justice. Works and Transport was split, right? So we have Transport and Civil Aviation, Ministry of Works and Infrastructure. That's one of the things that I do wonder. I don't see that as a negative or positive. I think it's a side grade. It all kind of depends on how you want to do things. Because on one hand, well, roadworks are part of infrastructure, but also are key to transport. So exactly who has now in the current configuration, who has the responsibility of road maintenance for the roads that don't fall under local government? More also, who has the responsibility of adding to the existing road network, which it's one of those controversial things where you don't necessarily, because we've been talking about this for the last couple of months, just adding more lanes to the pre-existing highways, that's not necessarily going to help traffic in the long run. Eventually, capacity will just be met by increased demand, more cars on your road. But better roads to connect the more far-flung areas of the country, as well as maybe a decentralization of government systems. Digitization helps with that, but I don't know if everything needs to be stuck in Port of Spain, because still having the offices where people have to work, so everybody is chucked up in the Northwest Corridor. I don't know if that's Northwest Corridor. I don't know if that's a good idea, but the Prime Minister said she tried to get the best talent for the cabinet. I have my questions. I don't want to be all negative straight off the bat, but if you've been watching Talking Point through the campaign season, you would know that there's a key ministry that is now occupied by someone who I already called out for not understanding the word diversification or incorrectly using it in a sentence. Now, okay, maybe it was just the stress of the moment, but I'm willing, in that case at least, to wait and see. To wait and see. We don't necessarily know how this cabinet is going to function, right? To some extent, is it going to be like how Cormembe did it? Because to what extent was Cormembe a subservient player, a secondary player, a key player, a central player? We don't know. Finance is an important ministry. But in a way, if the budgetary decisions are being made by cabinet overall, to some extent, the responsibilities of the Minister of Finance on the technical side, that is done by the technocrats. There were other people appointed as well who I was never impressed when they were in opposition. And of course, there are some who were not in opposition, but they were part of the coalition of interest. And I'll say this up front, I don't have any issues with Clyde Elder or Ernesto Keza and their appointments. In fact, I actually thought, and maybe because they're new, they were put as junior ministers. But there was another Labour person there, if my memory is correct, and he's not a junior minister. Labour, let me see if I can get this right. I think it's Labour and Small and Micro Enterprise. It's a very interesting combination of ministries, and I do wonder if it actually is a built-in conflict of interest. Because to advance small and micro enterprises, that's the business side, and Labour is the Labour side. It's interesting to see how that is supposed to work out. Tourism being tacked onto trade and industry. I could understand why split from arts and culture. I could also understand that. But to what extent does tourism and trade industry, or rather, if we assume trade industry is going to primarily be manufacturing, to what extent are those so different that perhaps it would have been better to have their own separate ministries? I get it. Not everything with regard to art and cultures is necessarily tied into tourism. So I get the split. It could be a side grade. This makes me wonder, and the TPP has come out and said they don't have an issue with this at all, but this does make me wonder if tourism is once again going to be the red-headed stepchild of our economic diversification efforts, foreign exchange earning efforts. Unnecessarily so. Although, I believe Farley Guston said it best, where what he wants is foreign direct investment and not necessarily government building another hotel. That's fine with regards to sandals, but we're not going to get foreign direct investment to market the country, market the Twin Islands, Trinidad and Tobago, because they both have things to offer for vacationing tourists, particularly ecotourism. We have a lot of culture, historical culture, historical sites, ecotourism sites and opportunities. Trade and manufacturing is not quite the same thing, right? Of course, the Ministry of Education was split again. To what extent? Part of the question is, to what extent are you putting things that are not necessarily, they don't necessarily go well together, but they are ultimately too small to have their own ministry. I don't know if tourism, well, given what the last two administrations, this current one and the previous one, what they've done with tourism, that's why I say they position it in that it doesn't have its own separate ministry, so it's not that important. What does that say about plans moving forward? Of course, the energy sectors, the immediate focus, and it's to be expected, But in the long run, I fear I'm going to be disappointed with the approach to tourism. And this is one of those things where some commentators are saying, don't just throw out everything the PNM did. One of the things is we have a new airport, great. And the Sandals deal is not that great. But ironically, tourism needed more than even what the PNM was doing. But I am afraid that in a way, that whole agenda of tourism is going to potentially be put on the back foot. Maybe it's to try to allow Tobago to take the lead on it, because that's the view, right? Vacationing tourists, Tobago is the island for that, right? That underestimates the country on a whole, maybe leaves us with lost opportunities, but there were more things. So back to the Minister of Finance. And one of the things with the cabinet appointments is it doesn't necessarily answer the question, the big question that was on some analyst's mind, and Stuart Young famously asked it. Dave Tanku attempted to respond to that question, did not succeed, in my opinion, at the time. But what he said now was actually a much better take, I think, overall. Right? That he has to assess the economy. He has to assess revenue and debt. He has to see what's there. This is an important step. It's an obvious step. I understand that. And hopefully we get good decisions coming from the assessment, right? But this is not a criticism on Dave Tanku, this is a criticism on politics. Politics might want certain decisions to be made because promises were made, and of course there are going to be some people who are going to want to see those promises kept. But this is, to some extent, the TPP did this as well. You get into office, you see what's there, and you level with the people. We could do this, this, and this, but we can't do that. And maybe the list of things that they can't fulfill is going to be quite long, at least in the immediate to short term, because the reality of the situation, and I already said this, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. The PNM had economic challenges based on things outside of their control. Those things have not gone away. It's not all of a sudden we have external economic challenges for the UNC, but we didn't have it for the PNM. And it's also not that, well, the PNM had it, but magically we don't allow that or give the UNC that allowance as well. No, we have to be consistent. Cost of living increases came from external shocks. Our lack of energy revenue is in part due to a global energy industry that was attempting to move away from fossil fuels and was seeing Trinidad and Tobago fossil fuels as being less and less profitable. So they wanted to move away from us. We had those conversations off air, and to some, maybe a little bit on air on Talking Point years ago, Karen and myself, watching the energy companies selling off their assets and seemingly looking to leave and not engage in potential projects that were on the table. Now all of a sudden things change. So to some extent, the UNC might have an easier time, but we're in such a hole. I wouldn't say that it's going to be an easy time, just easier. Easier than it could have been, but it still might actually be just as hard as whatever the PNM found themselves in the last 10 years. One of the things, and he made this point, and I wonder if he doesn't necessarily understand the implications of the reality of the point that he's making. $5 billion was just spent in inappropriately given contracts. All right, that's fine. Part of it is to figure out how much value was lost if those contracts, they were inappropriate, right? So how much value was lost from that. That's point number one. That matters to him as the Minister of Finance and to the country with regards to, did we lose any money to corruption there? But it wouldn't be the full $5 billion value. The other thing is, even if no value was lost, improper conduct still should be brought to a resolution. Investigations should be made, charges should be made, even if no value was lost. Because we're breaking proper procedure and we're conducting bad conduct, making bad decisions, improper decisions, all of these things deserve to have consequences for the perpetrators. But with regards to our accounting, our revenue versus expenditure, our net profit or loss position, doesn't really, the improper conduct doesn't matter. It's literally about the dollars and cents. Where did the money go with that $5 billion? And let's not assume that every year it was exactly $5 billion. Some years could be more, some years could be less. Just want to check. We have some comments here. So let's put up the first comment on the screen. A single ministry can create unified development plans for infrastructure, airlift agreements, and bilateral partnerships. I understand that, but some of those linkages were broken. So we went from tourism and arts and culture to trade and industry and tourism. So it's a side grade, arguably. And to what extent now, you have to understand there's a cost to do this, because we're going to have to essentially retool the two ministries, take tourism and split it from arts and culture. Does that mean arts and culture has to, or whatever arts and culture is paired with, it's going to go there? What personnel is going to go to which ministry? Who's going to have to move? Whose job is going to be redundant? Now it causes the permanent secretary. Which permanent secretary is going to go to trade, industry, and tourism? Right? Is it going to be the trade permanent secretary that now has to get up to date on tourism? Were they capable of tourism? Do they have a background in tourism or not? All of the, there's cost to do it. Who gets what office space? Who has to move offices? Right? And again, you're losing the arts and culture linkage to tourism. Take national security. Ironically, it's seen as a positive, and there are positive reasons for it. Not going to say it's all positive, but there are positive reasons for it to split it apart, right? That's not unified national security. We are doing the opposite with national security. We are splitting it apart and saying now we're going to have multiple ministers. And to some extent, what allows it to make some sense, and even though it is technically counter to the point you made, the Prime Minister will be in charge of it all. So there's a part of me that wondered, why have a minister? I mean, it's similar in America. You have a Minister of National Security, and then you have the Prime Minister in the previous administration as the head of the National Security Council. In America, you have the Secretary of Defense, and then you have the President above him. So this one-to-one direct line going up, it's not like there are other people, right? Although at least in the Americans' case, Secretary of State, that's always a very important and equal position to defense in any sort of foreign policy situation, even if it's military action. We don't necessarily have that complexity of national security, foreign defense, or national defense requirements. So I get it. Having more people in national security's case is a positive. There's no unified development plans there by having a single ministry. We have divested and split it apart. Trade and tourism are two separate industries. The comment is, you don't think both trade and tourism involve promoting TNT globally? A joint ministry can align branding, international relations, and foreign investment strategies. But you're not going after the same markets. Importers and vacationers are not going to be the same thing. We don't export to Scandinavia. Very few of our tourists come from the United States. And if we want to change that, we do need marketing. But that marketing is not necessarily going to help with our petrochemical products or any other manufacturing products that we have. Some of it could. One can make a case Chubby is a cultural thing, and it exports to North America. steel ban is a cultural thing, and culturally it's exported to North America. We don't actually export steel pans. Somehow, other countries, they just take our stuff because we did not position ourselves properly. But again, it's not that simple, because the kind of trade shows that our manufacturing businesses would go to are not tourism trade shows, right? The marketing is not going to be the same thing. One is to say our products are of this quality, this is what we have to offer, this is what you could get if you buy goods from us. The other one is come visit us. Awareness of the country, if you want to say that, and our country is in such a poor state with regards to global awareness that yes, to some extent, just a campaign to say we are Trinidad and Tobago could benefit both ends of that equation, tourism and exports. But it will only go so far. It's kind of sad that I'm coming to that realization where TNT as a country, I mean, back in the day, if you went to North America and you spoke to people who didn't know anything about the Caribbean, one of the questions you would get is, what part of Jamaica is that? That is how unaware people at least were 20 years ago about Trinidad and Tobago. And this is with Miss Universe and, you know, Atto Bolden and what have you. Maybe now there's a bit more knowledge. We've had a few more Olympians, some of them gold winning. Maybe now they realize we're not part of Jamaica. So it's not a, there are a couple other comments. All right. I'll save the other two comments because I do want to continue on. Back on the topic at hand with the new cabinet. Promises were made. And I understand where the Minister of Finance is coming from. He needs to check the books to know what's what. The thing is, the government is continuing. First, the opposition leader, she said it, I believe on Saturday, if not on Thursday. They're going to repeat, it might have been on Thursday. They're going to reverse or repeal the Revenue Authority Act. I don't know if this is going to be a negative or positive. I do know that she needs to kind of explain, okay, the PNM saw problems here. How bad are the problems and what's our alternative to fix it? Or if they're not problems at all, but it would be best if we could see some significant information to see why such an argument is reasonable or not. The arguments to repeal the Revenue Authority Act, I don't know if I agree with, to be honest, or rather the arguments that the labor unions had against the Revenue Authority Act, I don't know if I agree with, because to some extent, development of the country should not be barred by people being feared that their jobs are redundant. And this decision actually has a wide implication. And I doubt the PNM would have done this either. But if you really wanted to get TNT back on track, one of the things that probably would be unavoidable is to clean up the public sector of redundancy. And that's not going to happen because the unions, or enough unions, were part of the coalition of interest. That's not going to happen. So whatever the government says, and like I said, the PNM weren't going to do this either. Money is wasted on salaries that are not being, we're not getting any sort of productivity back in return, or we're getting minimal to bad productivity back in return. And that's going to continue. And an organization's wage bill is a pretty big chunk of that pie. So we're gonna continue with that and that hole in the economy. But then also, it was pointed out, okay, and this is not necessarily negative, but they're not going to increase water and electricity rates. All right, cool. Property tax is going to be repealed and refunds are going to be granted. All right, cool, because it's not as though we were experiencing any benefits from property tax anyway. It was not implemented fully anyway. Local government reform basically stopped anyway. So while we made the argument, was now the right time for property tax? I don't necessarily see this as a negative. I don't necessarily see this as a total positive either, because local government bodies needed revenue, needed financial resources from somewhere, and this was one potential way to get it to them, and now they're not going to get it. It's the local government bodies that the fixing of your community, not your MP. So the government is basically saying we're going to lose revenue. So I need to know, granted, the money paid by property tax is not that big of a chunk of money compared to the overall budget, but every little bit helps. How are you going to do the things that you promised? But I get it. You don't want to add burden to the population. And these are the hard decisions. Which is why I personally believe cleaning up the situation with the public sector was more important than maybe some people think. It's like the third rail of TNT politics. For America, or it's social security. For TNT, it's the public sector. I'm not anti-worker. I'm anti-worker that does nothing. I'm anti-eating a food, collecting a check, and not actually doing the job. That's what I'm anti. I'm anti of having an over-bloated labor force for certain entities, and maybe it's all public entities. I'm anti that because we can't afford the level of corruption that we used to, and that's part of it. And we have a new government that the first indicator is that they're not going to touch it because they won the election in part by relying on operators from that perspective that don't want to see that happen. And people voted for that, to be fair. To be fair to the UNC, at least in the short run, short term, out of context, no consideration given to wide implications. The voter in public voted for this. Cool. Ease of doing business, that also needs to be improved. But here's the funny thing about ease of doing business. And in fact, Stuart Young even said it himself. He complained about the public sector with regards to getting the $5 million to the pariah survivor and families. Well, you've been there for 10 years. You didn't try to clean it up. Don't complain about something now. But people want the government, the new administration, to deal with the ease of doing business. Part of that problem is the inefficiency of whatever workers have to do whatever function. Just ask Tobago, when the Registrar General Office were telling people things that were not government policy, or sorry, members of the office in Tobago, people working there were basically saying, oh, you had to do that in Trinidad. And the government was saying, no, you don't have to do that in Trinidad at all. You're supposed to be able to do it in Tobago. That's why they're there, to do the job, which they were not doing. And that's not a Tobago thing, as much as famously Tobago has gotten a bad rap for that. It's not that Tobago's a bad rap for that, it's that Tobago is like the rest of the country. It's just easy to single out because they are conveniently separate package. But hey, we don't want to clean it up, so fine. Don't expect ease of doing business to easily be fixed, because part of the problem is, don't expect customs to move faster. Don't expect certain government services to be on time, because part of the issue is that these inefficient systems and long workflow times and work times are part and parcel to the inefficiencies and bloated and lack of productivity in the public sector. It is what it is. We voted for it. So as much as rhetorically, I'm not saying I'm not declaring I voted for the UNC or not. I'm saying rhetorically, country voted for it. But I'm still going to speak about it. Okay, I just want to hit to the second topic because it ties into what I just said there, and this is with regards to the energy sector. what's interesting, or what I can appreciate, and I mentioned this last week, the new administration, part of the new agenda is they're switching gears away from Dragon and they're moving on to Guyana, Suriname, and Grenada. And Grenada, as mentioned last week, they're basically ready to do business with Trinidad and the new administration, which is good for us. Now, at the end of the day, we have the infrastructure that potentially could offer value to the rest of the Caribbean, or rather to our CARICOM neighbors who have energy projects, right? Guyana, Grenada, and to some extent Suriname. It's not going to necessarily be cheap though, but there is some value to having a gas pipeline. I mean, that's what we're going to do with Dragon. Guyana, it might not necessarily be as hard. Grenada might be hard, but Grenada could still potentially be a source of LNG. They'll have to have their own LNG plant if that's the case, for our own petrochemical sector, where we could then, to some extent, make up some of our shortfall by purchasing as a raw material. I don't know how the economics of the situation works on that, but one would think you should be able to purchase raw material. Yes, it's not going to make your product as profitable, but it could still help with the shortfall and therefore help somewhat with the foreign exchange burden. With Guyana, we could potentially just have a pipeline straight to Atlantic LNG and then use our facilities, maybe, right? All of that are questions that need to be answered moving forward. And this is one of the reasons why I said UNC might have an easier time than the PNM, relatively speaking. And it gives us some hope. But the flip side is, let's say we get new energy streams online and it stabilizes and improves our position. Will it all be wasted on short-term expenditure? That's the key question here. And ironically, you might get, similar to how the PNM went out in similar fashion to 2010, the UNC might conduct itself in similar fashion to the partnership between 2010 and 2015. And we've already complained about the PNM and their long-term lack of planning. I'm not going to say that the partnership had great long-term planning in its day. Are we going to see much of the same now? If they decide they're going to operate similar to how they operated then. They already said we're going to have laptops. I forgot to mention that. The problem is, again, that's one of the promises, how you're going to finance it. That's short-term financial expenditure. That's not a long-term capital investment. A long-term capital investment is to spend money in order to allow the economy to, in the future, make more money. So you invest in infrastructure. So you invest in marketing to capture market share as opposed to marketing to maintain market share, which is not the same thing. You invest in new facilities in order to expand industries or to put in new plants or things like that. Are we going to see that? You invest in improvements in the bureaucracy. You invest in improvements in the legislation because all of that work, salaries have to be paid, right? We just assume that it's for free because they will be paid anyway, but we reach the point now where we have to consider all of the expenditure and not just think, reoccurring stuff, it is what it is. One of the things, and the new Minister of Energy, Dr. Rudal Minilal, he said he intends to unravel all secrets of energy deals made by his predecessor. And that's all well and good, because AV drilling is a question that Karen has had on her mind from the beginning. From the moment the appeal was not made, she has never forgotten that situation. And rightfully so. There are questions there. We need answers. We don't know what the answers are. We're not presuming what the answers would be, but we would like to get answers on that. And hopefully this sentiment, we'll actually see a resolution to it. But there are other things that I would like to get answers for. Not just the energy sector, but perhaps that might answer why did the government seemingly have a very weird agenda of pushing Dragon as the be-all and end-all. But there are other things, like the Brent Thomas situation, like the Paria situation. like the Auditor General situation, like the FUL situation, like the earlier Edward Christopher arrest situation. There are a lot of things we would like to get answers for. Will we get them? No idea. Not to say that I don't think the UNC is necessarily against the Dragon deal, but just to point it out, it seems that they are relatively more aligned with the current US administration. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he did have a phone call with the Prime Minister. And I guess this is part of the diplomacy, right? Whether we agree with it or not, maybe we shouldn't be so close to a regime where the president is going to, you know, post have a social media post where you have an AI image as him as the Pope. I don't know what the point of that was. I don't even want to comment on it, to be honest. But that's the American administration of the day. And maybe this could help us eventually get deals with Venezuela, as long as those deals are realistic down the line. But also, this whole thing, I agree with in principle, because it aligns our interests properly. Our diplomatic relations with the US, our oil and gas sector needing natural resources, so it aligns us with trade partners who, at least in one case, famously did not want to align with us in the past. And it also aligns those interests with CARICOM security interests and Essequibo. And maybe that's part of the reason why Guyana didn't necessarily want to do business with us, because we were trying to have our cake and eat it too. The same people who we wanted to have energy deals with, they were basically saying they're trying to steal our land. And then, of course, could have been the event. Let's just say Venezuela did it and was somehow successful. Were we going to then offer our services to help exploit the natural resources and Essequibo for a Venezuelan regime? So what this does is it aligns all our interests a lot neater with regards to the international and regional communities. And I do think that at least to the short to medium term, we're better off for it. Long term, that hindsight might be a different determination with regards to that. But I don't expect that to happen. So we have to wait and see. Still probably going to be in a bit of a hole for at least 2 years. But there are other projects, local, national projects coming down the pipe. So, but all of that is not going to happen now for now. Some people might not like Dr. Munilal as Minister of Energy. I'll just say this. Let's see what the kid can do. Let him prove that he can't do it before we assume that he can't. At the end of the day, the country spoke, and I'm willing to see what they could do before I automatically go to criticize. The Prime Minister herself, she called out her own cabinet members to buck up, and I'm hoping that she lives up to that. But if we get into the same amount of firings as happened last time, what was a positive could be construed on for practical reasons as a negative. So we have to wait and see. I'll just say this. While there were some interesting appointments in the cabinet, none of them were as interesting as the selection or the choice for Attorney General. None of them. Some of them were good. Some of them I was hoping for and was anticipating positively, like Roger Alexander, Homeland Security. We'll get into that tomorrow. But I think you could look at John Jeremy as AG as a home run, surefire home run. Everything else, some better than others, but ultimately we have to wait and see. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open the phone line. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WS, and we'll be right back after this.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title. It's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
I'm back here and talking about the WESN Content Capital. Of course, now is the time we open up the phone line so you can talk to me, Sean Michael Small, and tell me all the things that I said that were wrong, out of bounds, incorrect, without any basis of fact. You can criticize me to high heaven. Once you have a good reason or sound reasoning, even if I disagree, that's fine. That's actually when it gets really interesting, right? I'm actually hearing a call on the line. Do we have a caller? I don't think so. So there are a couple of comments that the conversation in the middle of the show continued. I didn't necessarily want to continue with the comments at the time because I need to wrap things up to get to this point. But I'll take those comments now. I don't know if they could go up on the screen really quick. The first one about tourism can be positioned as a trade product exporting cultural experiences. Similarly, trade missions abroad can promote TNT as a tourist destination too. I understand that, and out of context, that makes sense, but I'm just saying the trade shows that you would send these missions to would not actually or necessarily be the same. So on a practical level, right, it's not that simple to try to promote it with the same exact channels and the same exact team. And the other thing is, on a technical level, at least with regards to TNT, you've kept those things separate for quite some time. So the people that you have, you're not going to necessarily have ministry people or experts that are versed in both. They are not the same thing from a practical situation. We have our caller on the line, Maraval. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Hi, Sean. Good morning. This is
Morning.
Maraval here.
Yes.
I find you should give Mulal a chance to see what he could do, because when Stuart Young went there, nobody knew Stuart Young could have done anything towards energy, because he was all over every different place they put him in. So you have to see what he could do now, because in the PNM, everybody was there in places that they wasn't suited for, like coloring wood. He was in finance. He know nothing about finance, you know. So it just has to stay and look and see how they could work, where they put them. You know, I'm just saying, I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, let's see what could happen.
Well, caller, I actually did say that. Thank you, caller. But I did say that. I closed with saying that and maybe you misunderstood me. The point I was trying to make was, at least for most of the ministers, we should be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and see what they could do before we judge them in absolute terms. They can or they can't, or they will or they won't, right? I think the reason why I single out Dr. Munilal is because he's a tenured politician. I won't say that he's a direct comparison to Common Bird, but it's a similar thing where he's been there a long time, Common Bird's been there a long time, and people will have a negative reaction, those who are not his supporters, of which, in theory, there are about 300,000 PNM supporters, give or take, right? And the undecided voters, or the undecided voters. And they might look at someone that's been in politics for as long as him, and they'll be just that alone will give you some negative reaction. Similar to Common Bid, who, up until the Auditor General thing, I would not have necessarily been outright horrible Minister of Finance. Then they had the Auditor General thing where it seemed as though he did not understand what the word audit means, and to prove your point, that implies he doesn't know anything about finance. So I was kind of ironically pushing against that sentiment. Yes, we have to give them a chance to succeed or fail before we determine that they're going to be a failure. That is to say, people who are not supporters of the UNC. We have a caller on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here. I'll continue more on that later. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Hello?
Go ahead, caller.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. You're on the air. If you're listening to the TV, please mute your television.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah.
Mute your television, sir. Sir, mute your television. Okay. Sir, you're on the line. You're on air.
Hello?
I'm not sure if you're talking to me or if that's background noise, but we're gonna have to cut the call if we're not hearing anything from you. Okay, the caller left. I don't know exactly what went on there. I was hearing background noise. I assume that was him listening to the broadcast. People, when you call in, you need to not listen to the TV. You need to mute your television because there's a delay. So, all right. Back to the previous caller's point. Yeah, I that's what I was basically saying. Dr. Munilal, as a long-standing politician, he's gonna come with a certain political baggage that some politicians have, right? Fitzgerald Hines had it. Carl Mimbert had it. Dr. Rowley had it. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar has it. And a few others have it. Wade Mark has it, right? But it's a new day, willing to see what they could do. And that's the thing. Let them prove to you that they're not fit for the job before you assume that they're not fit for the job. You haven't seen that they can't do it yet. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let them show us that they can or cannot. When you say it, it kind of sounds negative, but it's actually not negative. It's meant to be a positive. As I'm saying it, I'm trying to figure out a way not to say it in negative terms. Okay, we have the caller back from Marino. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Mr. Sean, I follow the program every morning. You're the other guy. But what I'm saying, you see, I'm asking that to this point. My whole problem is, You see, we speak with a lot of our people. They have problems now. When one government is in power, they have all the nice good systems. When the other power,
I'm sorry, I can't speak for the rest of the audience, but I can't understand you.
They have to go and work with the permanent secretary. They have to get to know what they're doing. Because as a plumber, you have to start from scratch. You have to learn to measure. You have to learn to take your measurement. You learn how to make contract and all these kind of things. I know the government will be take time to step in. But the student is using certain languages on the trade, election. There's barely people up to a high. So they're looking for them right now. I'm a person, as I always say, politics is like a man tracking a woman. You tell sure kind of nice thing to get in. I talk to them blunt, because I used to be here to talk to. And they get two sets of questions to think, and they find a way she can't cook, she can't think. You start to backpedal. And this is what a lot of them politicians do. Right? And that's my whole thing. So have a good day, Mr. John.
Thank you, caller. I couldn't understand most of it, but I think I got the gist of it with regards to the promises that are being offered and they're not going to be made. Here's part of the problem with that. They offer the promises that a lot of people wanted to hear. And they use terms and they use context that people wanted those promises to be made. So there's a part, and I've been saying this for at least a couple of years now. Part of the issue with our politicians and the type of promises they make are with us, the society. We want to hear some of these promises, even if they're not realistic, right? It's just one of those catch-22 things. All right, I have another. Okay, so there's a couple of comments. I'll take the most recent one now. If we can put it up on the screen. Countries separate internal security from military defense for clearer focus and specialization. We don't have the military defense challenges as other countries. That's the problem. Ironically, because I was saying something earlier about the fact that some ministries might not be big enough to be on their own. Maybe tourism is not seen as something big enough to be on its own, so it's piggybacked on something else. I would argue that national defense is not big enough to be on its own. Yes, we have. The thing about it is, the rivalries of the services will cause issues if you put a former policeman in charge of national security. You are not necessarily solving the problem, because the problem is essentially insubordination in the protective services. A lack of accountability and insubordination in protective services, that's a big problem. I haven't necessarily used the word insubordination, but just think back about when I would say about police officers defying their superiors in view of the public, or Coast Guard officers not going out to patrol, or Army officers doing nothing at all. At some point, there's insubordination somewhere, right? Unless the politicians that were in charge in the previous administration weren't actually giving any directives within their purview and their powers. So you're solving a problem, but by not solving it, but trying to make it disappear and remove it from the equation, but it'll still exist. National security or national defense, who are we defending ourselves from? What assets do we have to defend ourselves against any credible threat? That's the problem there. I'm not saying that it's a negative to split them. I'm just saying it's not unified, because our maritime defense's primary responsibility is not to prevent invasion. It's actually to prevent drug smuggling, which is a homeland security problem. The Coast Guard, I believe, in the United States is not under the Secretary of Defense, it's under the Secretary of the Homeland Security. I could be wrong, but I believe that's the case. Homeland security deals with border. National defense in America is, we have military assistance in South America or the Middle East or Europe or We have a base in South Korea. We have a base in Diego Garcia. You know, we have treaties with the United Kingdom for military cooperation and the Caribbean, right? But that's the thing. So I understand that, but we're not big enough. We don't operate on the scale, and we don't have the same kind of threats that other nations do to have that split. In fact, there's even a question, what does the regiment do? And I had a suggestion for what the regiment can do, but a lot of that will not be national defense as you would traditionally put it. A lot of that would be smuggling interdiction and anti-crime efforts and homeland security issues. And by splitting the two ministries apart, one now has to wonder how much harder it would be to integrate services for joint task force like the interagency task force, because now they have separate bosses. And now the Prime Minister is going to have to potentially micromanage some of those joint efforts more than the one minister from before. So there's a catch-22 to that decision in particular. And it's part of the reason why I disagree with it from the beginning. But I was told, well, you know, allowing two ministers, they could focus on each. I get that. But Homeland Security, that's the lion's share of the national security responsibility. Let's be real. National defense, that's the theoretical part of national security that was never really tested. And again, outside of maybe sending an expeditionary force to Guyana to help guard Essequibo, of which I doubt we are that well equipped to do, what potential national security operations on horizons for us? I want to go back to the commenter's previous comments, or the final comment with regards in the previous set. And this is something that I could agree with again. As much as it seems as though I'm disagreeing, I'm kind of playing the devil's advocate, because I didn't say that it's all bad. To some extent, I think it's just side grades. You're changing the benefits and the negatives from one set of pros and cons to another set of pros and cons. But the commenter was saying, I'm just thinking about the possible positives while also considering the challenges that come with combining trade and tourism into one ministry. And I get that, and that's the whole point of the exercise, right? And that's the thing. It's not as though there's a right answer in some of these questions and a wrong answer. The situation with trade and industry and tourism, the situation with homeland security and national defense, as opposed to a unified national security, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. The Americans' national security structure changed from Clinton's time into Bush because the policy agenda of the administration changed. So they went from Goldwater Nicholas, which did a very good job of giving local control, to back to a more centralized structure. And one could argue Donald Rumsfeld and all of that nonsense. And I can't remember Dick Cheney and to what extent they preferred it that way, or they actually did it that way. And as the needs, but also the political agenda of the American government and the American national security apparatus changed from the 90s to the early 2000s to the 2010s, the command structure and the organizational structure, more at the top of the entire national security apparatus, changed. And one could argue there were pros and cons to doing it at the time, and it wasn't necessarily all good or all bad. And we're in a similar situation. Some of these things are not all good and all bad. It's not all bad to take tourism to go with trade. It's not all good for tourism to be latched on to arts and culture. There were positives. Did we take advantage of those positives? Probably not. But ironically, it's not because, and this is the thing with tourism, and to some extent trade and industry, the issues that we had with the performance of those portfolios in the previous administration probably had more to do about budget and a lack of vision and a lack of ability to innovate within any sort of constraints or restrictions to bring about any type of vision than it did with regard to the organizational structure in a basic sense being bad. a lot of the issues that this administration will probably run into and potential mistakes they could make, not that they will make it, but they could make it, will probably come with regards to the budget before, well, you see what ministry was what portfolio was paired with what to form a ministry and which of the practical negatives of that, the exercise of having to reorganize and reshuffle everything after a couple of years, it should be done, right? If you know what you're doing. And then it'll come to doing the work, and the work needs money. And will they have enough money? Therein lies the question. Because arguably, we didn't see budget allocations to tourism, but we did see, well, we want to sell Magdalena and spend $400 million to renovate Hilda. But it didn't seem like those things happened directly under the Ministry of Tourism. The airport didn't seem like it happened under the Ministry of Tourism, nor did it seem like it happened under the THA. So exactly who did it operate under? And should those bodies be the ones making those decisions? One could argue the Ministry of Tourism would be best positioned to determine what's the needs of our air bridge and our international tourism product with regards to an airport. Did we look into it in terms of that? Because if we just want to look at market share, unless our market share figures improve, that airport is going to be even more underutilized than Napa. Because Napa has a bigger concert venue than Queen's Hall. So one would think just it's a bigger venue, it has greater capacity on the stage to do more things. But a lot of the veteran performing arts groups in the country prefer to go to Queen's Hall. Because even though it's smaller, even though it's potentially more cramped, it's just better equipped, better put together. So they'll go to Queen's Hall. Even though Napa has probably more parking, a larger size, it could just do so much more than Queen's Hall. With regards to that, it's not necessarily better designed than Queen's Hall. I've already mentioned one of the design flaws, but when you compare it side by side, just the loading ramp situation in Napa is ridiculously far more poorly designed than Queen's Hall. So, budget. That's basically what it came down to. Energy and finance are important for that reason alone. All the other ministries, they're going to fall behind that. The agenda is going to be expressed. There's supposed to be a mid-year budget review coming up. We'll get the first hint of what this government's medium to long-term agenda is from that. Hints, not necessarily all the cards will be revealed. But then, down the line, this year, September, October, there'll be a budget. And that'll be the first real indicator what their agenda is. And this is one of the areas where I don't think it necessarily struck a chord with most of the voters, but it did with some. The lack of vision in the budgets by the PNM administration for the last couple of years was very telling. And the vision of your government will to some extent be expressed in your budget. Lack of a vision means you don't seemingly have any kind of plan. And the results spoke for themselves, as the PNM would like to say. They just didn't really understand the conclusions or see them the same way we saw them. We close with a final comment here. Good morning. Yes, correct. Give them a chance. How we will know they can or can't. Right, exactly. My opinion is if she didn't know, then can't she wouldn't have placed them in the position she chose to place them. Thank you. Blessed day. I kind of get the gist of just what you're trying to say, and I get it. Even, you know, when you try and type a social media comment, it's not always going to be the best grammar. But if she didn't know, then she can't. Then can't. My opinion is, if she didn't know, then she wants a place that she. Somehow I can understand it, but to say it, I can't. Right? she herself doesn't know for sure how they're going to deal with, because we have to remember a lot of the people here are not exactly the same people from the partnership. Maybe Dr. Monilal, Anna Roberts, interesting, they're both in housing. But there are a lot of key things, and I do appreciate the fact, and budget is one thing. The other thing that's going to be a key indicator of the agenda is the legislative agenda expressed through the Attorney General. This is one of the reasons why when the PNM said that they wanted to be tough on crime, it was hard to take them seriously, because the legislative agenda for crime, they didn't have one, really. They did, but it was stuff that the PNM, Mr. Manning's previous administration, they were basically just copy and pasting. And then because they could not have a working relationship with the UNC, then they had to water it down to pass whatever they could by a simple majority, which for the most part, I would argue, has had little to no impact. Whatever they passed as a simple majority has had little to no impact. So, yes, we have ministers and they have ministries and portfolios, but the laws that govern, that provide the framework by which they could function, particularly national security, that's one thing that we have to look at. And then the budget. Because I've said that, and I have to be fair. We have to be fair. I said this time and time again, in defense of Dr. Nyan Gatsby-Dolly, in defense of Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, at some point it came down to budgets and cabinet's agenda, and it wasn't up to them, right? I thought the Ministry of Health under Terence Yal Singh had a good COVID response. At the end of the day, that was undermined by the national security apparatus. And that, to some extent, could be an issue of budget for maintenance of ships, for fuel, but also there were other things, like I said, what I believe to be insubordination. Education and its efficiencies, a lot of it is with regards to budget. How efficiently are we doing our education with the money provided? It's the largest allocation. But I said this before, I don't know if it's enough. I don't think it's enough given the scope of our education system. But all of these things, we have to have patience. One of the worst things that can happen, it doesn't matter if you're a UNC or PNM supporter, if you push the government to rush to make decisions, we are probably potentially going to get bad decisions because they're all short-term, sacrificing the long-term. All right, we have to end, but we have two big comments. Let's just, mass control might have cut it up, so let's just see the first part of it. Today begins the first actual day of work for the new administration in TNT. Yes, I agree with that. It seems that our media and public commentators are overly anxious to get everything done now. I could see whether I actually did not read this before what I just said. So it's instructive to know that even in our own homes, we prioritize needs and wants. I am very much open to giving the PM and the team at least 6 months period of settling in before making any critical assessment. I can agree with that too, because we'll get to the budget. And once we get to the budget, I do think that then we'll get the first real indicators of what their long-term plans are. Even new managers of industries, finance, and corporate businesses are given at least 1 year to prove themselves before confirmation. Just my thoughts. I literally did not read that before I said what I just said. So I'm 100% agreement with you on that. And some of the issues might take more than a year to solve with. What will help them is how they communicate it, how they communicate with us along the way. If they fail to communicate with us, then they run the risk of being condemned in a hasty manner. Some people say I was too quick to judge Ayla, but I was proven right in that case, but that's a lot simpler than a government. The next topic, the next comment, quick, if we could get it, and we'll close the show. Do we have it? Or no? Oh, I think he said this one is too big. All right, I'll just kind of briefly summarize it. Diversification economy. People prefer not to transit through the United States, especially now. Piaco should become a transit hub for people from South and Central America. It's already happening in the area of the airport, spin-off businesses. Many people from the islands used to come to TNT to shop online. Build some free zones. I think maybe like duty-free zones. You have to think outside the box. It's not only about the number of cruise lines and TNT that attracts. That's a numbers game. TNT needs tourists that spend real money. Yeah, the cruise ships had limited value and benefit, but I won't say that they don't have value and benefit. This comment points to part of it. We need to clamp down on unnecessary expenditure. That's why I spoke about the public sector and getting rid of the redundancy there. But we also need to realize some ministries, they're not going to get large budgetary allocations regardless, or not as much as we would like. And this is where innovative thinking has to come in. And this is one of the areas. This, more than anything else, is where the PNM failed. And this, more than anything else, is where the UNC, this current administration, could commit similar mistakes. We wait to see how they do the people's business. We wait to see if they have innovative ideas. And then they don't need to be perfect, but we would at least like to see the process of trying outside the box thinking, but not radical things for the sake of it being radical. The reasoning has to be there. The cost benefit analysis has to be there. Some amount of caution, but some amount of gambling probably might need to be there. Pilot programs would help with regards to education and national security and potentially trade and industry and maybe even tourism. Case in point, I mentioned taxes not being repealed or removed or not increasing rates, etc., etc. Get rid of hotel tax. How much revenue does it really generate to the country? Maybe it does, and in which case, I'll understand if you don't want to do it. But get rid of hotel tax, because I suspect Sandals is not going to be paying any taxes. That's point number one. And point number two, villas don't pay taxes. So why do the hotels have to be burdened when all of those villas are not? It's the health of an industry, not just profitability. All right, over time. So hopefully there's no more comments. I believe there are none. So with that said, have a good day, folks. You can make it so. One step at a time. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Thank you to the callers. Thank you to the commentators or to the comment posters. Never forget, it's nice to be nice. Some good discussion from the comment section and from the callers this morning. We all anticipate what's going to come in the rhetorical tomorrow. We'll see each other, though, in the real practical tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Joanne Williams-Carroll, and I am the Director of Behavioral and Mental Health at the Community Hospital. At the Community Hospital, we believe in nurturing mind, body, and soul. Through our counseling and chaplaincy program, we will provide you with support and strength you need to help with your mental and emotional well-being. Give us a call.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every